Yo, what's up, guys? It's Adam here, and today we're diving into 7 absolutely wild Reddit stories that had me sitting here like, bro, is this even real life? First up, we've got my ex spread lies about me online until I showed the real truth. Classic Reddit X energy, always chaotic. Then we're jumping into my love triangle took a dark turn I never expected. Honestly, at this point, I feel like love triangles should be illegal. And after that, we dive into my sister destroyed my relationship because she couldn't have her one true love, so I made her watch him fall for me instead. Yeah, that one's as messy as it sounds. I'm low-key excited because I love when people get humbled. And don't worry, we've still got a couple more insane stories coming up, so stick around. If you want to skip to your favorite ones, timestamps are down below and in the description. Jump wherever you want. Alright, grab your snacks, get comfy, vibe out, and let's roll straight into story 1. My ex spread lies about me online until I showed the real truth. I never thought my quiet little life in Atlanta, Georgia would end up plastered across the internet like some cheap online scandal. But here I am, writing this because apparently the universe thinks I haven't suffered enough and wants me to relive it in long form. So buckle up, because what my ex did to me wasn't just petty. It was strategic, manipulative, and almost cost me everything I worked for. My name is Tina Carter. I'm 27, and I've spent the last six years building a reputation as a reliable digital marketing strategist. The kind of person companies trust with their image, their launches, and their campaigns, their entire online presence. Ironic, considering how one person decided to torch mine in a matter of days. I wasn't always the calm and collected type, but I learned to be, especially in a field where everyone is 2 seconds away from losing their mind over algorithms and clients who think hashtags are magic spells. And honestly, I was proud of who I had become. Independent, financially stable, emotionally mature, someone who didn't fall for drama. Which is hilarious, because then there was Marco. God, even typing his name makes me want to throw my laptop out the window, but I met him at a mutual friend's 4th of July barbecue 2 years ago. And back then, he was just this easygoing, slightly awkward, 24-year-old guy who loved making dumb videos on his phone and talking about how he wanted to be big someday. He wasn't famous or anything, but he had a small following on TikTok, like 8K at the time. And he had that charming, goofy confidence that feels disarming when you're not expecting it. I remember him spilling an entire cup of lemonade on himself and laughing like it was the funniest thing ever, which somehow made me laugh too. And before I knew it, we were sitting on the curb, talking about everything from movies to childhood trauma like we had known each other for years. And honestly, I liked him. I liked the way he talked, the way he wasn't intimidated by my job, the way he hyped me up when I told him about a big client I landed. For about a year, things were good. Simple, sweet, kind of immature sometimes because he was younger, but manageable. Until it wasn't. The shift wasn't obvious at first. It was tiny things. He'd get insecure when I posted a nice outfit photo. He'd sulk when I worked late on campaigns. He'd complain about how easy my job looked while he was grinding for followers. But the real crack showed when one of his videos suddenly went viral. Like really viral. Overnight, he jumped from 8K to 120K followers. And you would have thought he won an Oscar the way he acted. Brand deals started trickling in. Small stuff at first. Protein powder, phone case sponsors, those weird energy gummies influencers push. And with every free product he got a little more cocky, a little more condescending, a little more obsessed with numbers and engagement and what the audience wants. Suddenly, everything was content. Our dates, our private conversations, even arguments, he'd twist them into stories to tell on TikTok. And the first time he posted a funny story about my girlfriend overreacting. I told him that wasn't okay and he apologized, but only after the video hit 30K views. That's when I realized Marco wasn't dating me. He was dating attention. I broke up with him 3 months later after he filmed me asleep because I looked peaceful and posted it without asking. That was my last straw. I told him I needed someone who respected boundaries, someone who didn't treat my life like content, someone who didn't think every moment was monetizable. He cried, begged, said he'd change, promised he'd delete the video, blah blah blah, but I was done. I walked out of his apartment that night thinking the worst part was over. Oh, how naive of me. The first weird post came 2 weeks later. I didn't even follow him anymore, but one of my friends sent me a screenshot like, is this about you? And it was this stupid black screen Instagram story that said, crazy how some people pretend to be good partners but are actually toxic behind closed doors. Healing era. There was no name, no tag, nothing specifically pointing to me, but everyone knew we had broken up recently. I rolled my eyes and moved on. I wasn't about to get dragged into vague posting games, but then came the TikTok. Oh God, the TikTok. He posted one of those sad music storytelling videos where he was like, I don't like opening up about my personal life, but I was in a manipulative relationship for a long time. Glad I got out. And suddenly his comments exploded with, we love you, King, you deserve better, toxic women are everywhere, and all that cliche nonsense. Again, he didn't say my name, but it was obvious. And I told myself it would die down. Surely he got whatever validation he needed, right? Wrong. The next week, he posted a follow-up TikTok, this time talking about a partner who controlled everything and gaslit him into believing he was worthless and used money to manipulate him. That part made my mouth literally drop open. Me? Manipulative? Controlling? Money? The guy borrowed from me constantly because brand deals take time to pay, and I covered groceries half the time. I started getting random DMs from strangers calling me names, telling me Marco deserved better, telling me I should be ashamed of myself. One girl even messaged, how dare you ruin a good man? I remember staring at my phone like I was reading messages from an alternate universe. Things escalated fast. His following doubled again. People stitched his videos, influencers defended him, podcasts talked about him. And then one night, while I was doing dishes, my email pinged with a message from a client, a big client, asking if we could discuss concerning allegations circulating online. My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. I knew what it was about. I knew exactly. I called Marco, straight to voicemail. I texted him, delivered, no response. I tried Instagram, blocked, TikTok, blocked, Snapchat, blocked, even Venmo, blocked. I laughed out of shock because who blocks their ex on Venmo unless they know they're guilty? I tried reaching one of his friends, but they either ignored me or didn't respond. It was like Marco had vacuum sealed himself inside this victim narrative where I was the villain and no one wanted to challenge his healing journey. Meanwhile, my reputation, my actual real-life career and livelihood, was being shredded by people who didn't know me. The next morning, my client called again, and hearing the hesitation in her voice made my chest feel like it was caving in. She told me one of her interns forwarded her a TikTok where Marco implied I emotionally abused him and sabotaged his career. I almost laughed because the only reason his career even existed was because I helped him edit his videos, organize his posting schedule, and pitch to brands when he had no clue how to write an email. But instead of laughing, I apologized for the drama I didn't create and promised to send over evidence proving none of it was true. After the call ended, I sat in my living room staring at the wall, feeling this cold, sharp fear I'd never felt before. Not heartbreak, not humiliation, but the realization that one person's lies could actually destroy my professional credibility. That terrified me more than anything Marco ever did when we were together. But it still wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was what I found that night. One of my acquaintances, someone who followed Marco, sent me a link with the message, "Girl, I think he crossed the line." And when I opened it, my blood ran ice cold. Marco had uploaded an audio recording, this crackly, low-quality voice memo of a woman screaming and cussing him out, calling him names, threatening him, sounding completely unhinged. And the caption, "This is what I dealt with. Believe survivors." The voice didn't even sound like me. Not really, but it was manipulated enough that someone who didn't know me could easily be convinced. And the comments, thousands of them, thousands, calling me a monster, a narcissist, a psychopath, saying Marco should sue me or expose me more. People saying they knew I gave off bad vibes. People telling him they were proud of him for escaping abuse. Someone even wrote, "Her voice is disgusting. You can hear the evil." I stared at the screen, listening to the fake audio over and over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. That wasn't my voice. It wasn't real. It was fabricated. And that was the moment, right then, that I realized this wasn't just petty breakup drama or vague emotional posts. This was deliberate character assassination. Marco had crossed into, calculated defamation. And whether he meant to ruin me or just boost his engagement, the result was the same. My name, my career, everything I'd built was under attack. And I knew right then, in that sickening moment where my own fake voice echoed through my phone, that if I didn't fight back, he would destroy me completely. The night I found that fake audio, I barely slept. And when I did drift off for a few minutes, my brain replayed the distorted screaming like some twisted soundtrack. But by morning, the panic had settled into something sharper. Analysis mode, the same mindset I use when clients come to me sobbing over a PR nightmare. So I put my coffee beside my laptop, sat at my kitchen table, and listened to the audio again. Not as Tina, the ex-girlfriend, but as Tina, the strategist. And the more I listened, the more I realized how sloppy it actually was. There were unnatural cuts, small glitches, the faintest overlapping echo that shouldn't be there unless someone badly spliced clips. Certain words didn't match mouth placement. Breaths were out of rhythm. The whole thing felt like a puzzle forced together with a hammer. It was like Marco expected no one to question it because emotion blinds people faster than logic. I pulled the audio into editing software, something I use for clients, and started isolating the layers. Within 5 minutes, I found 2 tracks mashed together, the original voice grain pitched lower with certain syllables stretched. It was fake, 100% fake. And the messed up part, he didn't even put that much effort into hiding it, which told me he wasn't just reckless, he was confident. Confident enough to believe no one would look deeper. Confident enough to think I wouldn't fight back. Confident enough to assume his followers would worship anything he posted, no matter how flimsy. And the worst part, he was right for now. By mid-afternoon, I already had 3 more strangers DMing me hateful paragraphs. But mixed between them was something unexpected. Messages from people who used to be close to Marco. One girl I barely remembered. Jenna, a mutual friend who drifted away months earlier, messaged me a simple, "I'm sorry he's doing this. You didn't deserve any of it." She followed with, "I stopped hanging out with him after he tried to turn people against one of our friends using a fake story. He likes being a victim. It gets him attention." Then someone else messaged his old gaming buddy Kai, saying, "I unfollowed him months ago because he lied about having depression to get sympathy donations. Be careful. He loves manipulating narratives." And then another message came from a girl I'd never spoken to. "I'm not surprised. He tried lying about his last ex too, but people didn't care because he wasn't famous yet." I just sat there, staring at the screen like, how many people saw the patterns I never saw? I felt this weird mixture of anger and humiliation because all these red flags existed, but I missed them, blinded by the version of him he showed me. And that realization stunk, but it also did something else. It woke something up in me, something steady, something focused. By evening, I had created a new folder on my desktop labeled Marco Situation Evidence. It was pathetic how instinctively I organized it. Subfolders for screenshots, audio analysis, messages, timelines, financial records, everything. When clients deal with PR disasters, I always tell them, receipts don't lie, panic does. So I approached my own life with the same discipline. I screenshotted every threatening message sent to me. I downloaded Marco's TikToks before he deleted them. I archived his Instagram stories. I saved the fake audio file and my breakdown of its edits. If he wanted to burn my reputation, I would build a fireproof vault. But while I was doing all this, Marco's follower count was exploding, like wildfire. Every time I refreshed his page, the number jumped. 350K, 370K, 400K. People stitched his videos crying, calling him brave, calling him inspirational. Influencer girls made duet videos saying things like, "Ladies, this is why we check in on our men." And I wanted to scream because the person they were defending didn't even vaguely resemble reality. He had figured out the formula. Sad music, vague accusations, strategic tears, dramatic pauses. It was anti-influencer gold. And while his digital empire grew, mine started to crack. 3 days after the audio drop, I got an email that made my heart sink. A long-term client, one I'd worked with for almost 2 years, canceled their contract. No warning, no discussion. Just, given recent events circulating online, we must protect our brand's reputation. I stared at the email for a full minute before the words actually registered. 2 years of work, gone in one sentence because my ex-boyfriend decided victim Marco was good branding angle. I had bills, a mortgage, commitments, and suddenly I was down several $1,000s in income because Marco wanted views. I called the client, trying to fight through the humiliation, but they dodged my questions and politely repeated that their legal team advised caution. When the call ended, I just sat in my office chair, numb. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't punch anything. I just sat there breathing and thinking, this is what people mean when they say digital lies destroy real lives. The same night, something unexpected happened. A message popped up from someone named Mandy Starling on Instagram. Her profile picture looked familiar. Some influencer girl who had done collabs with Marco once. But her message wasn't what I expected. It said, "Tina, I don't know if you remember me, but I need to tell you something. Marco has a private Discord server where he and a bunch of his friends planned out his story arcs. He's doing that now too. He's been bragging." My stomach dropped. I asked her for proof, half expecting her to ghost me, but she messaged back almost immediately. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll send screenshots." And oh boy, she delivered. She sent photos of chats where Marco talked about crafting a narrative, where he talked about audience manipulation, bragging about how easy it is to make people believe anything if you cry on camera. He talked about how he needed a villain to make his healing journey blow up. And guess who the villain was? Mandy added, "He kicked me out of the server last week because I told him he was crossing a line. He said he didn't need people with a conscience. I felt sick reading that. Sick, but also electrified, because this was the first real crack in Marco's armor. This was something I could use. I asked Mandy if there was any way I could see more. She hesitated for a long time, then finally said, I can get you in, but you can't say it's from me. We worked out a plan. She gave me access through an alternate account she had used before he banned her. The profile picture was a drawing, the username generic. When I entered the server, my pulse was pounding. It was like stepping into a war room I didn't know existed. There were channels labeled brainstorm, script ideas, receipts, content schedule, brand coordination, even a private voice channel where his little inner circle hung out. And the messages, oh God, the messages, months of them. Him mocking followers, calling them gullible sheep, laughing about how easy it was to spin stories, talking openly about faking screenshots to prove his exes were toxic, bragging about how he could cry on command. And the worst thing, there were conversations from before our breakup where he talked about wanting to do a victim arc next because his comedy content plateaued. He literally planned this. It wasn't about hurt. It wasn't about healing. It wasn't about trauma. It was content, a business strategy, a growth hack, and I was the tool he used. I spent hours in that server, quiet, invisible, recording everything, screenshots, message logs, voice chats, people laughing about how the Psycho X storyline always hits. Even audio files of Marco practicing his sad voice. And the moment that snapped something in me was when I found a thread where he said, the great thing is Tina won't fight back. She's too professional, too scared of bad press. She'll stay silent. That did it. That sentence, that arrogance, that confidence in my silence. That's when something in me hardened like molten metal plunged into cold water. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't shock. It wasn't heartbreak. It was resolve. Cold, focused, razor-sharp resolve. I wasn't going to survive this quietly. I wasn't going to wait for his lies to ruin another job, another friendship, another piece of my life. No, I would not just defend myself. I would expose him. I would tear down the persona he built off my pain. I would show the world exactly who he was, using his own words, his own messages, his own recordings. And as I closed my laptop that night, sitting alone in the dim glow of my office lamp, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marco Ruiz had chosen the wrong woman to turn into a villain. Because this time, the truth was going to burn him alive. I swear I will never forget the night Tina finally decided she was done playing defense and ready to flip the entire internet upside down. Because watching her transform from someone who had been dragged through hell into someone who calmly built the perfect digital execution was the closest thing I've ever seen to poetic justice. And it all started with her sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor with her laptop open, hair tied up, iced coffee sweating next to her while she muttered to herself like a detective in a true crime documentary, as I watched from the couch trying not to interrupt her train of thought. I remember she looked up at me once and said, I'm not posting until this is airtight. No loopholes, no doubts, no wiggle room. And she wasn't kidding, because the 17-minute video she eventually created wasn't some rant or emotional breakdown like Marco had predicted she'd make. It was a structured, chronological, receipt-stacked presentation that could have been played in a courtroom, starting with a timeline that laid out everything from the day they met to the day he sabotaged her life, color-coded and sorted with folders labeled things like financial theft, fabricated screenshots, cheating evidence, private recordings, and the one I found the most delicious, Marco calling his audience sheep. Each folder filled with screen recordings, bank statements, metadata captures, email headers, chat logs, and videos so damning that even I felt secondhand embarrassment for the guy who had spent 2 months calling her a manipulative liar while raking in sympathy donations from fans who thought he was being unfairly attacked by his crazy ex. Because she started the video in the calmest tone imaginable, sitting in front of a neutral background with no flashy makeup, no dramatic music, just her saying, "Hi, I've stayed quiet for a long time because I wanted to make sure that what I share today is factual, verifiable, and impossible to dismiss. Everything you will see is backed by metadata, timestamps, and original sources. I'm not here to attack anyone. I'm here to tell the truth." And from there, she went straight into her first section, the financial theft, opening with the bank app screen recording that showed Marco transferring $4,800 out of her account using her saved login after she had entrusted him with paying the videographer for her brand deal shoot. With the timeline showing the money never went to the videographer at all, but instead straight into Marco's crypto wallet. And she even included a clip of the videographer saying, "Tina paid me weeks ago. I got my money directly from her, not Marco." which instantly obliterated the entire story Marco had been telling about covering her business costs. Next came the fabricated screenshots Marco had paraded around social media, the ones he claimed were proof Tina had admitted to cheating on him. And the moment she started explaining the metadata discrepancies, highlighting mismatched fonts, inconsistent UI elements, wrong timestamps, and even an iOS version Marco didn't have installed at the time, I swear my jaw actually dropped, because she didn't just say they were fake, she proved it with screen recording of her verifying the original chat export files, then compared them side by side with Marco's edited versions, while a caption on screen read, "These were fabricated. Here is the proof." And she kept her tone flat, emotionless, almost surgical, which made the whole thing hit harder because it wasn't fueled by anger, it was fueled by truth. And then, without even pausing, she moved into the cheating evidence, which honestly was the part that hit the internet like a grenade, because she had ring camera footage of Marco sneaking someone into their apartment while Tina was at a shoot, and texts between Marco and the girl he'd been seeing where he called Tina too soft to fight back, followed by a video dated 2 weeks before the breakup, where Marco was literally telling someone, "I'm only staying with her because she's good content." And I swear the entire internet collectively froze when she inserted the clip of him laughing to a friend saying, "My followers are sheep, bro. They'll believe whatever I tell them if I cry enough." Because suddenly, the victim narrative he had milked for months collapsed in seconds. After the allegations came the testimonials, short clips from people who had worked with Marco, editors, assistants, managers, influencers, people who said he ghosted them after promising payment or pressured them into unpaid work. And these weren't salty ex-friends. These were industry people with professionalism dripping from their voices as they said things like, "I never wanted to get involved, but after seeing Tina get dragged for months, I can't stay silent." And Marco lied to everyone, including me, which added a whole other layer of credibility to the video. And while all this played, Tina occasionally chimed in only to clarify context, never once raising her voice, never once insulting Marco, just calmly letting the facts eviscerate the man who had called her a danger to creators and emotionally unstable. She ended the video with a simple screen of text. "I am pursuing legal counsel. This is not drama. This is my life." And then she clicked upload while I sat across from her, realizing that I had just witnessed the digital equivalent of a controlled demolition. Within minutes, the video went viral. Not regular viral, but nuclear meltdown viral. Hashtags trending, reaction channels stitching it in real time. TikTok creators pausing at every receipt and saying things like, "Oh my god, she came prepared," and "This is the most organized takedown I've ever seen." While Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it this year, exploded with threads dissecting every frame like it was a courtroom exhibit. Because the internet loves receipts. And Tina didn't bring receipts. She brought the entire file cabinet. Brands that had been partnered with Marco started quietly pulling away at first, then not so quietly posting statements like, "We have terminated all ongoing collaborations with Marco effective immediately," and some even apologized to Tina publicly for believing the wrong person. Influencers who had previously defended Marco began posting shaky camera Instagram stories, saying things like, "I didn't know the full story," and "I feel misled," and "I shouldn't have spoken without facts." And watching them backpedal was honestly hilarious, because 2 days earlier they were calling Tina toxic. But easily the funniest part was Marco trying to play the victim again, hopping on live streams with puffy eyes saying things like, "I'm being targeted," and "Those clips are taken out of context," only to have viewers flood the chat with timestamps from Tina's video proving exactly why his excuses didn't hold up. And for the first time since he started his smear campaign, no one believed him. Not even his most diehard fans, who started leaving comments like, "Bro, you lied," and "This is embarrassing," and "We trusted you." And I don't know if karma actually exists as a spiritual force, but watching Marco's empire crumble in real time made me believe in something. Still, the wildest part came a few days later when Marco, the same guy who had publicly humiliated Tina, mocked her, dragged her name for attention, and laughed about manipulating his audience, actually sent Tina a private email. Not an apology press release, not a legal notice, not a PR crafted statement, but a desperate, rambling message begging her not to take legal action, saying he was going through a lot, that he acted out of fear, that he didn't want things to escalate. And the part that made both of us stare at each other in disbelief was when he wrote, "Please don't ruin my life," as if he hadn't spent months trying to ruin hers. Tina didn't respond. Not because she didn't have the words, but because she didn't need to. Her video had already spoken for her. The truth was already out, and for the first time in months, Tina looked relieved. Not because Marco finally apologized, but because the world could finally see who he really was. And for the first time in a long time, I saw her shoulders drop, her breathing steady, and a tiny, exhausted smile appear as she said, "It's done," even though we both knew this was only the beginning of what came next. I never imagined that by the time everything hit its peak, I'd be sitting across from a lawyer in a sleek glass office overlooking downtown Seattle, hands still shaking from the adrenaline of releasing the truth video that detonated Marco's entire, carefully manufactured victim narrative. And hearing the words, "You have one of the strongest defamation cases I've seen in years." But that's exactly where I found myself the morning after my entire life flipped from being hunted to being vindicated. The air felt lighter, my chest felt open for the first time in months, and the exhaustion I had been dragging like weights from my ankles suddenly turned into something sharp and electric, because now, for the first time since the breakup, I had power. Real, legal, undeniable leverage, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed 40-something woman named Danielle Brooks with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in digital reputation cases, spread out printed screenshots of everything I had collected, Marco's Discord messages bragging about editing the audio until she sounds insane, his private admissions to his followers that he made up half the claims for engagement, the PayPal logs showing the money he siphoned from my freelance payments, the receipts of him cheating, and the metadata breakdown, proving he fabricated entire conversations. She slid each piece of evidence across the table like weapons, each one heavier than the last. And as I watched them build a timeline, my timeline, I actually had to swallow down the lump in my throat, because seeing my trauma become something structured and legally actionable was surreal, almost disorienting, like watching someone rebuild a home that burned down while you were still standing in the ashes. Danielle explained the options: criminal charges, a civil lawsuit, a cease and desist, or a complete takedown strategy paired with a massive claim for damages. And the more she talked, the more I realized that Marco had absolutely no idea what kind of avalanche he had triggered by underestimating me. I walked out with a binder full of categorized evidence, a scheduled deposition date, and a retainer agreement that would allow Danielle to start immediately. And on the Uber ride home, I found myself refreshing Marco's social media just out of morbid curiosity. He had gone dead silent. No new videos, no crying rants, no victim monologues, nothing but a pinned apology that looked like someone had wrung it out of him like water from a cloth. The comments were brutal, with former supporters calling him a manipulator, a liar, a fraud, and even people who had never heard of him saying things like, "How do you fake an entire abuse narrative and think you won't get caught?" Which honestly felt like poetic justice considering the hell he put me through. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly his world began to collapse once brands saw the receipts I presented. Within 48 hours of my video going live, 3 sponsorships pulled out, his merch drop disappeared, his Patreon lost nearly all its subscribers, and his crypto side hustle, which I learned was basically him selling useless courses, shut down because people started demanding refunds for knowingly fraudulent behavior. The internet doesn't always get things right, but when they turn on someone guilty, they move like a tidal wave that crushes everything in its path. Behind the scenes, things were even messier for him. I learned through one of the whistleblowers that his management company had dropped him after receiving legal letters from my attorney. His streaming platforms revoked his monetization access, and even some of his closest online friends deleted every collaboration with him out of fear of getting dragged into the mess, which was actually hilarious in a dark way considering these same people once harassed me for ruining Marco's mental health, when in reality he'd been orchestrating a harassment campaign like some twisted hobby. When Danielle officially filed the lawsuit, defamation, fraud, emotional distress, and monetary damages, I felt a strange combination of relief and apprehension, not because I doubted my case, but because it was the first step in taking ownership back of my life. I had spent so long playing defense that this sudden shift into offense felt foreign, powerful, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Marco responded through a cheap lawyer who clearly had no idea how deep he was in, offering a settlement so embarrassingly low that Danielle actually laughed when she read it, shaking her head as she said, "This isn't even enough to cover the cost of the subpoenas we're sending." And she told them point blank that we weren't interested because we were prepared to take the entire thing to court and win. The moment the lawsuit became public record, Marco's last scraps of reputation evaporated, gossip channels covered it, commentary YouTubers broke down the evidence, legal TikTok creators explained the case in detail, and even strangers who had no interest in him or me were talking about how this is why fake victim culture is dangerous. And watching the narrative finally turn toward truth instead of lies was like breathing clean air after months of choking on smoke. The pressure got so intense that Marco eventually released a long, rambling public apology video where he pretended to take accountability while simultaneously blaming stress, burnout, his followers, his childhood, and even me. Yes, he tried to claim my silence made him escalate his lies, as if that was ever a justification. The comment section shredded him alive, calling it the worst apology ever recorded. And when he tried to message me privately with a pathetic essay asking me to please forgive him so we can both move on, I didn't even reply. I just forwarded the message to Danielle, who replied to his lawyer with a crisp, emotionless line, "My client will only respond in court." And then the fallout hit him harder than I expected. His apartment landlord raised concerns about the sudden drop in his income. His car got repossessed. He posted on a burner account about struggling to pay rent, and two of his long-term online friends publicly accused him of dragging them into his schemes without consent. It was like watching a house of cards collapse, each lie pulling another one down until there was nothing left but the truth he had tried so desperately to bury. Meanwhile, in my life, something unexpected happened. Opportunities started flowing in like water. Clients who had dropped me reached back out with apologies. New businesses contacted me after the video went viral, and I even got invited to speak on a panel about digital accountability and online misinformation, which felt surreal because just a few months earlier, I was crying on my kitchen floor, terrified of losing everything because one bitter man wanted attention. Rebuilding wasn't instant. My anxiety didn't vanish overnight. My trust didn't magically restore itself, and I still occasionally woke up expecting to see some new lie trending with my name attached. But gradually, day by day, I felt myself becoming stronger, more grounded, more aware of my own worth and resilience. I realized I wasn't just surviving the situation anymore. I was redefining it, turning it into something powerful, something that could help people who didn't have the resources or support I was lucky enough to gather. I began volunteering with an organization that helps victims of online harassment and misinformation. And for the first time, I felt like something good was being built from the wreckage Marco left behind. The lawsuit eventually reached its final stage, and faced with overwhelming evidence, Marco was forced to settle. Publicly, on record, with a written apology he couldn't wiggle out of. And while the financial compensation helped stabilize the damage he caused, the apology itself was what sealed everything for me. It wasn't sincere, of course, but it was permanent, undeniable, a mark in history proving that truth had won. Watching him read his apology aloud in court, voice small and cracking, made something inside me settle, a wound finally stitching itself closed, not out of revenge, but out of closure. His remaining followers vanished, his accounts became ghost towns, and he eventually disappeared from the internet entirely, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of lies that finally caught up to him. And me? I rebuilt my business better than ever, doubled my client list, expanded into consulting, and turned my experience into a message I shared widely. That silence in the face of lies isn't peace. It's surrender. And the moment you decide to stand up for yourself, even when your knees are shaking, you take back control of your life. Months later, after everything was finalized, after Marco faded from public memory like a bad rumor dissolving into the air, I sat at my desk one quiet evening, logged into my account, and typed the final message I knew would close this chapter forever. A calm, firm, dignified post reminding everyone that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. It just needs to stand. Then I hit publish, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I breathed freely, knowing Marco would never have power over my life again. The end. My love triangle took a dark turn I never expected. I never thought my life would turn into some twisted love triangle you'd usually see on Reddit at 3 a.m. But here I am, 23 years old, living in a cramped apartment in Austin, Texas, working a new job in a tech firm I barely understand, and already messing up my life before I even finished setting up my 401k. And before anyone asks, yes, this story starts with a girl. Actually, two. And the problem wasn't choosing between them. The problem was that one of them loved me too softly to say it out loud, and the other saw straight through me in a way that made me feel exposed down to my bones. Sarah was my best friend, my person, the one who'd show up with takeout when I was stressed, who'd make stupid jokes when I spiraled, who'd sit on the roof of her apartment with me at 2 a.m. and talk about life like we were old souls trapped in young bodies. We met sophomore year of college, both 19, both awkward, both pretending to understand calculus when we absolutely didn't, and from day one, she felt like home. We had this stupid inside joke about how we'd open a coffee shop together one day. She'd bake, I'd make playlists, we'd argue about whether oat milk was a scam, and that dumb dream somehow kept us tethered to each other. And yeah, there were almost kisses. Moments where she'd look at me too long, or I'd brush her hair away from her face, or she'd fall asleep on my shoulder during movie nights, and I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering why I didn't just lean down and tell her the truth. That I wanted her, but I was scared wanting her would ruin everything. So I stayed safe. And that's where everything went wrong. Because when I started my new job, entry-level dev, on a project I had no business being assigned to, the first person who talked to me wasn't another awkward new hire. It was her, Misha, 25, my senior by 2 years, confident in a way that made everyone else in the room straighten up. She had this presence, sharp, polished, charismatic, that made you feel like she knew something you didn't, like she saw more than you were saying. The first time she walked over to my desk, I swear my brain unplugged. She rested one hand on the divider wall and said, "You're Adam, right? The one they said learns fast?" In a tone that sounded like both a compliment and a test, and I laughed like an idiot because no one had ever looked at me the way she did. Like I was interesting. Within a week, she was calling me into meetings where I didn't belong, asking for my opinion in front of managers, telling me she liked the way I thought out loud. And maybe I should have noticed the way she watched me, not just casually, but like she was studying me. But I didn't because I was too caught up in the rush of someone like her noticing someone like me. I started staying late at work, telling myself it was because I wanted to impress the team. But really, it was because Misha worked late too. She'd lean over my chair to point at something on the screen, her perfume steady and warm, her hand brushing mine more often than accidental. And every time she laughed at one of my dumb comments, a part of me lit up in a way I didn't know how to control. That's when things with Sarah started shifting. She'd call me late, like always, asking if I wanted to grab tacos or go on a night drive, and I'd catch myself hesitating. For the first time in 4 years, I hesitated, and she felt it. Sarah was the kind of person who noticed small things, the slight change in tone, the pause before a sentence, the distracted nod. She didn't say anything at first, but I saw it in her eyes the night she came over to help me assemble IKEA shelves, and I spent most of the night checking my phone because Misha kept sending me memes about how coding is just creative suffering. Sarah laughed less that night. She left earlier than usual, too, saying she had an early morning even though she never had early mornings on Thursdays. And the thing is, I felt guilty, but I didn't stop. Misha pulled me deeper without me realizing it. She placed a hand on my arm when I was stressed, compliment my ideas in meetings, tell me I was refreshing because I wasn't jaded like everyone else. One night, around 10 p.m., when most of the office was empty, she leaned on my desk and said, "You trust too easily, you know that?" in this quiet, strange tone. And when I asked what she meant, she just smiled and said, "It's not a bad thing, just rare." I should have paid attention to how she said that, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself thinking about her on the drive home, replaying every conversation, comparing the thrill she gave me to the comfort Sarah gave me, and somehow convincing myself that confusion meant possibility. And then came the first moment that should have set off every alarm bell in my head. But at the time, I brushed it off. It was a Friday afternoon, and Sarah and I had plans to go get ice cream at this little spot we'd gone to since college. I'd mentioned it to her earlier in the week, just casually, nothing major, and I definitely hadn't told anyone else because our ice cream spot was sacred. At work, I was refilling my water bottle when Misha walked up beside me and said, "You still going to Amy's tonight?" I froze. Amy's ice cream was the spot. Our spot. The one only Sarah and I knew about. I hadn't even posted about it online in years. I asked her how she knew, and she shrugged, smiling like it was nothing. "You mentioned it the other day," she said. Except I didn't. I knew I didn't. I remember replaying the entire week in my head. Every conversation, every moment. And there was no point where I had said that name, not even by accident. But she delivered the line so smoothly, so confidently, that I second-guessed myself. I laughed it off, and she laughed too, and then she added, "Tell Sarah I said hi," and my stomach dropped. Because I never told her Sarah's name. Not once, not in passing, not in a joke, not in any conversation. The only people in my job who even knew I spent time with Sarah were the ones who'd seen us together on FaceTime during lunch once. But even then, they didn't know her name. Yet Misha said it like it was nothing. Like it was obvious. Like she'd known her longer than I had. And the way she looked at me afterward, smiling, eyes sharp, like she was watching my reaction more than my words, made something cold drag his fingers down my spine. That was the first moment I realized something was off, really off, and it was only the beginning. I wish I could tell you that after that moment, at the water cooler with Misha, after hearing her casually drop Sarah's name like she'd memorized the script of my life, I pulled away, trusted my instincts, and protected the person who'd been with me through everything. But the truth is far uglier. I ignored every red flag because I didn't want to believe anything was wrong, and because some stupid part of me liked the attention I was getting from a woman who felt like a storm compared to the quiet safety I'd always had with Sarah. Balancing both of them became this chaotic emotional juggling act I never asked for but kept feeding anyway. With Sarah, everything felt soft. Late night phone calls, quiet dinners, laughter over stupid inside jokes, this warmth that made me feel grounded. But then there was Misha, intense, intoxicating, unpredictable, who started texting me at 2 in the morning, saying things like, can't sleep, thinking too much, you up, and rough day, come over if you're awake. At first I didn't go, obviously, because Sarah's voice echoed in my head, telling me not to get pulled into things I didn't understand. But then there were nights where I said yes without thinking, driving across the city to her apartment while convincing myself it was just to talk, even though I knew that wasn't true. And every time I sat too close to her on her couch or watched her pour wine with this tired, vulnerable expression, I could feel something in me drifting away from the version of myself Sarah would recognize. I didn't realize how far I'd wandered until the night Sarah finally confessed. We were sitting in her car outside a diner we'd been going to since we were 19. The windows fogged because it was raining too hard to get out, and she kept fidgeting with the strings of her hoodie like she couldn't figure out where to put her hands. Adam, she said quietly, which already scared me because Sarah never said my name unless she was about to tell me something heavy. I need to tell you something. She looked like she was holding her breath, and the moment stretched so long I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then she said it, soft, terrified, trembling. I like you. I've liked you for a long time. And I swear the world went silent. I'd imagined that moment 100 times in the past. Imagined what it would feel like if she ever said those words. Imagined grabbing her face and kissing her like I'd wanted to for years. But instead, I froze. Completely froze. Because Misha's shadow had settled somewhere in the back of my mind. And the guilt of what I'd been doing twisted everything until all I could think about was how wrong the timing felt. I didn't say, I don't feel the same. But I also didn't say, I like you too. And that silence, God, that silence, hurt her more than any rejection. She kept nodding like she understood even though she didn't, mumbling something about bad timing and forget I said anything. Then she wiped her eyes and drove me home without speaking another word. I sat on my couch after she left, staring at my phone, wondering how the hell I had become the guy who broke Sarah's heart without even trying. And then the phone buzzed with a message from Misha. Can you come over? I need you. And like an idiot, I went. That was the night Misha shifted from flirtatious coworker to something darker. She wasn't sad or fragile like before. She was intense, almost territorial, asking me why I'd been distant, asking if I'd been with that girl again. When I asked how she even knew Sarah had come over earlier because she shouldn't have, she brushed me off with a laugh, saying, "You're easy to read, that's all." But her eyes didn't match her voice, and for a second I saw something calculating flicker behind them. Still, I didn't push. I let it go. Again. And that's how everything spiraled. Because once Misha sensed she had some kind of hold on me, she tightened it. She started showing up places she had no reason to be. Like the little cafe Sarah and I always went to on Sundays. A hole-in-the-wall place hidden behind a bookstore that no one knew unless someone took you there. One Sunday morning, I was sitting with Sarah, trying to make things right between us, trying to be normal again, when the bell above the door rang and Misha walked in like it was the most natural thing in the world. She smiled when she saw me, walked straight to our table and said, "I didn't know you came here," even though the lie was so obvious it made my stomach twist. Sarah stiffened immediately. She knew who Misha was. She'd seen her name pop up on my phone enough times to understand, and the moment the two of them made eye contact, I swear the air in that cafe froze. Misha placed a hand on my shoulder, subtle but intentional, her thumb brushing my shirt in a way Sarah definitely noticed. Then she told me she'd forgotten to send me an update and wanted to give it now. It wasn't even important to work information. It was something she easily could have emailed, but she said it with this fake innocence that made me feel like I was being cornered. Sarah watched the whole exchange silently, holding her cup so tightly I thought she might break it. And when Misha finally left, she didn't look at me. She didn't say a word. She just got up, grabbed her bag, and whispered, "I can't do this," before walking out into the cold air and disappearing around the corner. That was the first time I felt like I truly lost her. I ran after her, but she ignored me, tears streaming down her face, saying she couldn't believe I'd been lying to her for weeks, that she felt stupid for ever telling me how she felt, that she didn't understand why I didn't just tell her I was seeing someone, and I didn't even know how to defend myself, because technically I wasn't seeing Misha, but also I kind of was. Not physically, not officially, but emotionally, mentally. I was already entangled in something I didn't understand, something I couldn't explain without sounding like I betrayed her. After that day, The guilt hit me so hard I actually tried to pull away from Misha. I stopped answering her late night texts, told her I needed space, focused on work instead of staying late with her. But she didn't take distance as an answer. She took it as a challenge. She started popping up at my desk unannounced, sending me long paragraphs about how she felt abandoned, telling me she trusted me more than anyone, that she needed me more than I realized. Every message felt like a trap wrapped in vulnerability, and every time I tried to set a boundary, she'd twist my words into something hurtful. Finally, I caved and confronted her. Actually confronted her about how she knew so much about Sarah. I asked her straight up, "Why do you know her name? And how did you know where we were on Friday?" But instead of answering, she smiled that unsettling little smile and said, "You're worrying too much," before brushing a hand down my arm and changing the subject entirely. It was like watching someone dodge reality with professional precision. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. A week later, when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Sarah saw me leaving the office with Misha. It wasn't what it looked like. We were just walking out at the same time, I swear. But the way Misha leaned close to say something to me, the way she laughed, the way her hand grazed my back, all of it pieced together into a picture Sarah couldn't unsee. I saw her across the parking lot, standing next to her car, staring at us with this expression I can't even describe. Heartbroken, betrayed, devastated. And before I could call out to her, she got in her car and drove off. I felt my entire chest cave in. I went home that night feeling like the worst version of myself, like a coward, like a liar, like someone who didn't deserve the kind of love Sarah had offered me. I ignored Misha's texts, I ignored her calls, I didn't sleep, I didn't eat, I just sat in the dark trying to figure out how the hell everything got so out of control. And then, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Not from Sarah, not from Misha, from an unknown number. The message was short, cold, chilling. "You have no idea who Misha really is." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a normal love triangle. It was something much darker. I didn't sleep the night I got that anonymous message, not even for a second. I just lay there staring at the screen like it was a countdown to a disaster I'd been pretending wasn't happening, my heart pounding so hard it hurt as the words looped in my head. "You have no idea who Misha really is." And instead of brushing it off like a prank or some jealous coworker's drama, something inside me twisted because I already knew, deep down, that whoever sent it wasn't lying. They were confirming a fear I'd been trying to suffocate ever since Misha first said Sarah's name without permission. I typed back immediately, "Who is this?" But the message never delivered, like the number didn't exist anymore. The next morning, after hours of pacing my apartment and nearly convincing myself I was overreacting, another text came in from the same number. "Google her ex. Start with her old town. Look for missing people reports." My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit down. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be that guy who digs into someone's past like a paranoid lunatic, but the dread sitting in my chest wouldn't let me ignore it. So I opened my laptop, typed in Misha's name, and added the name of the city she'd mentioned once or twice when she talked about her old life. And the first result wasn't a LinkedIn profile or some old college blog. It was a courthouse record. Petition for restraining order, filed by Daniel Kamisha's ex-boyfriend, filed 18 months ago. The summary listed emotional harassment, stalking, repeated unwanted contact, property intrusion. My throat went dry. I scrolled through the documents with shaking hands, my pulse hammering louder with every line. And then I noticed something else. Comments from people in their community who mentioned Daniel had disappeared suddenly last year, deleted all social media, moved out of town, cut contact with everyone. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed to get away. I felt sick. I slammed my laptop shut as if the information might crawl out and choke me. It didn't feel real, but it felt too real at the same time. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I needed someone who wasn't drowning in this mess. So I texted Sarah, "Hey, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but can we talk? It's important." She didn't respond right away, which I deserved. But after an hour, she replied, "I'll come by at 3. Don't make this harder than it already is." And waiting for her felt like waiting for a lifeline. But before she arrived, before I could process anything, Misha called. Not texted, called, which she almost never did in the morning. Her name popped on my screen and something in me panicked, like answering would pull me deeper into something I couldn't escape. But letting it ring felt dangerous too. Against every instinct, I answered, trying to sound normal like my world hadn't just cracked open. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She jumped straight into crying, loud, panicked, broken crying that sounded like a performance but hit me hard anyway. "Adam, I need you," she gasped between sobs. "Everyone at work is against me. I can tell. They're trying to push me out again. Again, that word hit differently after what I had just read. I stayed silent because I didn't trust myself to speak. But she kept going, her voice shaking so dramatically it almost sounded rehearsed. You're the only one who understands me. The only person who hasn't left me. Please don't leave me too. Her words wrapped around me like a tightening rope. I should have hung up. I should have put distance between us, but guilt twisted inside me. Guilt from Sarah, guilt from Misha, guilt from everything, and before I could stop myself, I was muttering, "What's going on?" That was enough. She launched into a long story about how her last job destroyed her, how coworkers made up lies because they couldn't handle a woman in leadership, how her ex painted her as a villain because he couldn't handle the breakup. She made herself sound like the victim of a conspiracy, and part of me wanted so badly to believe her, because believing the alternative would mean admitting I'd been manipulated from the start. Then she suddenly whispered, "I know you've been distant. I know someone's gotten into your head. Was it that girl, Sarah?" My blood ran cold. Before I could answer, there was a soft knock at my door. Sarah. I flinched. Misha heard it. "Who is that?" she snapped, the softness dropping from her voice instantly. "Is she there?" I panicked. I told her I'd call her back. She told me not to. She told me she couldn't handle being abandoned again. She told me she wouldn't survive it. Then she hung up. My hands were shaking when I opened the door for Sarah. She looked tired, guarded, hurt, but she still stepped inside. The second she saw my face, her expression softened with concern. "Adam, what's going on?" So I told her everything. The anonymous text, the restraining order, what little I'd found online. Sarah didn't interrupt. She didn't accuse me of lying. She didn't throw my mistakes in my face. She just sat down, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Adam, I think she's dangerous." Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me finally snap into place. Because the truth is, I had been feeling unsafe for weeks. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. But the part that terrified me most wasn't what Misha had done in the past. It was what she was doing now. Because later that night, after Sarah left and I thought things might finally make sense, Sarah called me in tears. "She's messaging me," she choked out, "from some random account. She said I should stop interfering. That I'm ruining your life." My heart stopped. "Sarah, don't respond to her. Block her." "I did," she cried, "but she keeps making new accounts." And that's when the paranoia started eating at me. I began checking my windows twice before sleeping. I unplugged my phone from the charger just to make sure nobody was tracking it. I flinched every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. And at work, Misha acted completely normal. Smiling, confident, acting like nothing weird was happening. Except every time I looked away, I could feel her eyes on me. Watching, studying, possessing. One afternoon, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and went to her office, shutting the door behind me. She smiled at first, but that smile faded when she saw my expression. "How did you know so much about my personal life?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "How did you know about Sarah? How did you know about places I go?" She blinked slowly, then leaned back in her chair with this eerie calm, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Adam," she said softly, "I pay attention. Isn't that what you liked about me?" I stepped back, my chest tight. "That's not an answer." Her eyes sharpened. "You think I'm dangerous?" she asked quietly. "You think I'm like him?" My stomach twisted. "Like who?" She stood up, stepping closer, her voice trembling with something that felt halfway between rage and desperation. "My ex, the one who tried to ruin me. The one who told everyone I was crazy because he couldn't handle losing me." I swallowed hard. "You had a restraining order filed against you." The room went silent. Her expression changed so fast I felt the temperature drop. Something dark slipped across her face, something that didn't belong on someone my age, something heavy and frightening. Then the tears started. Not soft tears, not emotional ones, but sharp, weaponized tears mixed with hysteria. She accused me of taking strangers' words over hers. She said she thought we had something real. She said Sarah was poisoning me. And then she whispered something that made every hair on my body stand up. "I love you, Adam, I really do, and Sarah needs to stay out of the way." I left her office, shaking so badly I had to sit in my car for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. That night, I dug deeper. Into court documents, into local forums, into anything that had her name attached to it. And what I found shattered any illusion I still had. Her ex didn't just file a restraining order. He filed multiple police reports for stalking, emotional harassment, repeated boundary violations, aggressive messages showing up at his home unannounced, a pattern, a history, a trail of people she had latched onto, suffocated, broken. HR complaints from her previous job, including one that mentioned she had unusual interest in a male coworker, leading to conflicts and eventual resignation. And then, the worst part, a subreddit thread, old, buried, barely archived, from someone describing a woman who becomes obsessed with coworkers, who learns everything about their personal lives, who targets men with emotional vulnerabilities. The description was perfect. The age, the city, the details, and the last comment from the original poster hit me like a punch to the chest. She used to stalk my best friend's girlfriend online before they even met. She said it helps her understand her competition. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice, because attached to that comment was a username. And when I clicked it, I saw Sarah's Instagram in the list of accounts this person had mentioned being targeted months before I ever met Misha. I wasn't Adam, the guy who was bad at love, or Adam who was confused between two women anymore. I was a 23-year-old dude in Austin, Texas, who woke up every morning wondering if today would be the day Misha finally blew up my life, Sarah finally gave up on me, or I finally lost the last pieces of sanity I had left, and the chapter starts with me sitting on Sarah's couch, hands shaking, voice cracking, heart pounding, telling her everything, every secret, every manipulation, every threat Misha had thrown at me like it was some twisted game she thought she'd already won. And Sarah, she didn't interrupt. She didn't yell. She didn't even look angry. She just looked heartbroken that I had been carrying all this alone. And when I finally broke down and told her about the stalking, about the anonymous messages, about how Misha had known things from my personal life months before we met, Sarah covered her mouth with her hands like she was trying not to cry and whispered, "Adam, this isn't just toxic. This is dangerous." And hearing her say that out loud hit me like a truck because it made everything real in a way I had been avoiding. But before we could even process any of it, my phone lit up with Misha's name again, and Sarah saw it and shook her head, whispering, "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep letting her in." And for the first time I agreed because something in me finally snapped, and I told Sarah I wasn't going to let Misha control my life anymore. But saying it was one thing and actually facing her was something else entirely. Because when I tried to block her quietly and just slip away from her life, she went nuclear. Showing up outside my apartment building at 12:47 a.m., crying so hard her mascara was dripping down her neck, banging on my door for 20 minutes straight, leaving voicemails alternating between "I need you" and "You owe me" and "Don't make me do something I regret." And when she said that last part, something inside me froze because I realized just how far she might go. And the next morning, I woke up to 10 missed calls, 3 voice messages, and 1 text that made my stomach drop so hard I felt physically nauseous. "Does Sarah know who you really are?" And the second I read it, something switched inside me, and I realized Sarah wasn't just collateral damage anymore. She was a direct target. So I gathered every screenshot, every weird message, every HR document I had dug up, every text thread of her subtle manipulation, every anonymous warning someone had tried to send me, and I packed them into a folder so thick it felt like I was carrying my own case file. And I walked straight into a lawyer's office with Sarah sitting silently beside me. The lawyer, a calm, older guy with silver glasses, took one look at the messages and muttered, "You need to file a report." And that was the moment I knew things were officially out of my hands now. But as if the universe wanted to test me one last time, the moment I got home, Misha was in my parking lot waiting, leaning against her car like she belonged there. And the second she saw me, she ran toward me sobbing, trying to grab my arm, begging for one more conversation. And when I told her I was done, she snapped, flipping instantly from crying to accusing me of betraying her, of choosing Sarah, of not seeing what they were doing to her. And when I kept refusing to let her inside, she threw her last weapon at me. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, voice trembling just enough to seem real. But after everything I'd learned, everything I'd seen, everything I'd pieced together, I knew instantly it was a lie because she said it with the same cadence she used when she lied at work, the same tone she used when cornered, the same tremble she used when she wanted control back. And when I didn't fall for it, she completely unraveled, screaming at me in the open parking lot until someone from the building called security. And when the guards escorted her away, she was still yelling about how I was ruining her life. But the terrifying part wasn't her meltdown. It was the blank, cold look she gave me right before she got in her car, like she was memorizing my face for the last chapter of some revenge plan she hadn't finished writing yet. After that, everything moved fast. HR took my report seriously. The lawyer helped me file an official complaint. The police documented everything. Sarah stayed with me almost every night because I was barely sleeping, jumping at every phone buzz, every footstep outside my door, every shadow that looked a little too familiar. And in the middle of all that fear, something quiet happened between us, something real. One night we were sitting on my couch, the apartment dark except for a streetlight bleeding through the blind. And I told her I was sorry, not in the "I messed up" way, but in the "I never meant to drag you into hell with me" way. And she pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, "You didn't drag me. I chose to be here." And that sentence, that moment, broke me open in a way nothing else had. Because for the first time in months, I felt safe, really safe. And for a second, I forgot that Misha existed at all. And maybe that was the universe's cue. Because once the police got involved, once my lawyer contacted her employer, once HR found the old complaints from her previous job, her entire facade crumbled fast, and she finally realized I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. Because when she tried calling from a new number, I blocked it. When she tried emailing me with long, manipulative essays, I forwarded them straight to the lawyer. When she tried to send messages to Sarah, Sarah didn't even respond. She just sent them to the officer handling my case, and it was like a spell broke. Like the fog in my brain finally cleared, and I could see just how deep I had been sinking without noticing. And to be honest, after all the chaos, the screaming, the manipulation, the threats, the lies, the fear, the endless emotional roller coaster, the ending itself was weirdly quiet one day. I just realized she had stopped contacting me. No calls, no texts, no random appearances, nothing. Just silence. And for a moment, it scared me more than the harassment did because it felt wrong, like she was too good at disappearing. But I tried to trust the process the lawyer told me about. And I tried to rebuild my life piece by piece, starting with Sarah, because she was the one person who hadn't left, hadn't abandoned me, hadn't used my vulnerability against me. And one night, about 3 weeks after everything ended, she and I were sitting on her balcony, drinking cheap wine and laughing for the first time in what felt like forever, and it just happened. We kissed, soft and slow and tired and overdue, and it wasn't dramatic or explosive or movie-like. It just felt like the truth finally getting spoken out loud. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had made the right choice. Not out of fear, not because Sarah was the safer option, but because she was the real option, the one who had loved me before the chaos, during the chaos and after it. And I thought that was the end of the story. I really did. Until 2 weeks later when I woke up, checked my phone, and found a message request from an unknown account with no profile picture, no posts, no name, just one sentence that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up and sent me right back into that old fear. Don't think she's gone. The end. My parents left me in a hurricane to protect the house. 4 years later, they ask why I won't help. I was 18 the night Hurricane Seraphine slammed into our small Florida town, but if I'm being honest, I felt older than that. Like responsibility had been drilled into me from the day I could hold a hammer. Like my dad believed emotions were a luxury only wealthy people enjoyed, and we weren't wealthy, so I didn't deserve to feel anything. Growing up in the Miller household meant walking around on eggshells, hearing the phrase, "Don't argue with your father," more times than I ever heard "I love you," and learning that silence was the safest thing I could offer them. My dad liked to say he was old school, which was his polite way of calling himself the dictator of the house, and my mother played the quiet shadow who followed him around like she owed him her breath. If he said jump, she asked how high. If he said I wasn't living up to his expectations, she nodded as if it were a fact written into the laws of nature. So when the first emergency alerts hit our phones warning that Hurricane Seraphine was strengthening into a Category 4 and bearing down straight toward our coast, and neighbors began boarding up windows and packing their kids into SUVs headed north, I assumed, naively, that for once in my family's life, survival might take priority over my father's obsession with keeping the house safe. I was wrong. My father stood in the living room with his arms crossed like he was daring the storm to challenge him, television blaring with red alerts, meteorologists repeating the words, "mandatory evacuation," while he muttered about soft people who panic every time the government says boo. My mother wrung her hands, not in fear of the storm, but fear of disappointing him. And when I said, "Dad, we need to go, this is different. They're saying the levee could break," he snapped his fingers at me like he was calling a dog and said, "A man protects his home, Lucas. You want to run? You want to leave everything your mother and I built? You want to be a coward?" That word, coward, always got me because he used it every time I disagreed with him. And even though I knew deep down he was wrong, he had conditioned me so well that guilt hit my chest like a punch, made me feel obligated to stay even when every instinct screamed, "run." And the worst part, my mother chimed in with, "Your father knows best," as if that settled the matter, as if her blind loyalty was some kind of moral compass. That was the night I realized families can gaslight you long before you ever learn the word. The storm sirens wailed outside, the wind already strong enough to make our shutters rattle, and still my dad refused to leave, insisting we check the backyard, secure the shed, even move furniture away from the windows like any of it would matter in wind strong enough to tear roofs off. While we worked, my eyes drifted, like always, to the locked door at the end of the hall, the one place in the house I had never been allowed to enter. My dad kept the key on a chain he wore under his shirt, and when I was younger, he used to tell me the room was storage. But I once saw him leave in a rush and accidentally tug the door open a crack before slamming it shut. and I caught a glimpse of boxes stacked neatly, plastic bins, something metallic gleaming under a tarp, and a desk with a computer that definitely wasn't storage. I'd asked about it once and got grounded for being disrespectful. Since then, the locked room had become this silent warning. Curiosity equals punishment. But that night, as the pressure in the air shifted and the trees bent like puppets, I felt something cold settle in my chest. A realization that whatever was behind that door mattered more to my parents than my safety ever had. The power flickered. The wind howled louder. Rain blasted the windows in sideways sheets. Every emergency alert that came in begged us to leave, but my father stood his ground like he could command a hurricane into submission. I kept glancing at my phone, watching as friends sent videos from the highway showing bumper-to-bumper traffic, anxious families praying their homes would still be standing after the storm. I wanted to be with them, I wanted out, but instead I was stuck inside a house that already felt like a coffin. When the levee rupture warning blared across the emergency broadcast system, an unmistakable monotone message stating, "Levee failure confirmed, seek higher ground immediately," I saw something I had never seen before. Real, genuine panic in my father's eyes. He cursed, yelled for my mother to grab her purse, sprinted to the front door, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought he was finally going to say, "Let's go, Lucas." But he didn't. He didn't even look at me. He just yelled, "Get in the truck," and ran outside with my mother scrambling after him. The water was already rising across the yard like a fast-moving shadow. I shouted, "Dad, wait, I'm coming." But the wind swallowed my voice. They climbed inside the truck so fast it was like muscle memory, like they'd practiced leaving without me. I stumbled after them, slipping on wet tile as the roof groaned overhead, and right as I reached the doorway, a deafening crack split the house as the front beam collapsed and blocked the exit, trapping me inside. The sound jolted them. My mother screamed my name, but my dad grabbed her arm and yelled, "We can't go back, move." And just like that, they drove off. My mother crying, my father pale as a ghost. Neither of them looking back as I pounded on the fallen beam with everything I had. The house shook violently. Wooden frames splintering, water flooding fast across the floor until it reached my ankles, then my shins. I clawed at debris, adrenaline making my hands numb, but every piece I moved was replaced by another falling from the ceiling. The locked door burst open down the hallway from the pressure shift, and a flood of boxes spilled out into the water, but I couldn't even look inside. I was too busy trying to stay alive. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die, alone, in darkness, because my parents chose a house over me. I remember feeling the strange mix of terror and clarity crashing over me like the water rising around my waist. That sickening certainty that they didn't stay because of me. They stayed because of whatever they were hiding. And when that thing they valued more than me was in danger, they didn't hesitate to run. They didn't hesitate to sacrifice me. My legs were shaking, the ceiling groaning above me when I heard a voice faintly through the storm. "Lucas, hold on!" Mr. Alvarez, our 74-year-old neighbor, appeared like an angel through the broken window, soaked to the bone, flashlight in his mouth, crowbar in his hands. He smashed through the remaining debris with a strength I didn't know he had, grabbed me by the back of my shirt, and hauled me out just as another section of the roof collapsed behind us. The moment we escaped into the storm outside, I looked up and saw my parents' truck speeding away, taillights blurring through the rain, disappearing into the flood waters, while my childhood home buckled and groaned like a dying beast. The roof caved in completely with a sickening crash, sending up a cloud of splintered wood and insulation. Mr. Alvarez dragged me toward his elevated porch, yelling for me to move, and even though the world was roaring around us, I swear everything went quiet in my mind, except for one truth. My parents chose themselves. They chose their secrets. They chose that locked room. Not me, not their son, not the kid who spent years trying to earn their approval. As the house collapsed behind me, taking every memory and every illusion I'd ever had about my family with it, I felt something inside me crack open. A grief, a fury, a clarity so sharp it hurt. I wasn't a son that night. I wasn't someone they loved. I was a tool, a shield, someone expendable. And once you realize the people who raised you would rather protect a house and whatever they hid inside it than save your life, you can never look at yourself or them the same way again. When the storm finally passed and the sun rose like nothing had happened, the world felt upside down, like the hurricane had stripped away not just houses and trees, but every piece of the life I had known. And when emergency responders came to our neighborhood, they found me sitting on Mr. Alvarez's porch wrapped in a blanket, shivering from more than the cold. watching what used to be my home reduced to a scattered skeleton of broken beams and twisted metal. They kept asking where my parents were, and every time I opened my mouth, the truth tasted like poison, that they had left me, chosen themselves, and sped off into the storm while I fought for my life. In the chaos that followed, while neighbors accounted for missing loved ones and rescue teams searched collapsed houses, Mr. Alvarez barely left my side, checking my breathing, handing me water, telling the paramedics exactly how he found me. When they transported me to a shelter 3 hours inland, he went with me, sitting beside me like a grandfather I never had. My parents didn't call, not that day, not the next, not even when FEMA declared the area a federal disaster zone. They didn't check if I survived. They didn't ask where I was. It took 3 days before they texted, and even then the message read like a passive-aggressive post-it note. We're safe, house gone, stressful time, hope you made it out too. Hope you made it out too? As if they didn't know they left me trapped under a collapsing roof. That text was the final push I needed to leave Florida behind, because once the shock wore off, the anger in me hardened into something sharp and clear, and I knew staying there would kill me in a different way. Mr. Alvarez had family in North Carolina, his daughter Elena, and son-in-law David, who offered to take me in, temporarily, until things settle. Those words turned into an invitation I accepted, not because I wanted charity, but because it felt like a chance to breathe, to exist somewhere my parents' shadow couldn't reach. When I arrived at their home outside Charlotte, exhausted and carrying a trash bag of donated clothes, they treated me with a kindness that felt foreign at first, like they didn't expect anything in return. Elena made me hot meals every night, asked about my plans, gave me space to sleep and heal without questioning why I woke up screaming some nights. David taught me how to drive stick, helped me apply for my GED graduation documents, and paid the therapy copays my insurance wouldn't cover. Therapy became the first place I ever said out loud that my parents left me intentionally, that the hurricane didn't create the distance between us. It revealed it. My therapist, Dr. Carmichael, didn't pressure me to forgive, didn't tell me family is everything, didn't minimize the trauma. She helped me understand that survival comes with layers of grief that don't disappear overnight, and that trauma isn't about the moment you almost died, but the years that trained you to think your own safety wasn't worth protecting. Slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt myself. I started community college the next fall, majoring in information systems because coding felt like a world where logic made sense, unlike the emotional minefield I came from. I studied in coffee shops, worked part-time at a movie theater, made friends for the first time who didn't treat me like a project or a burden, people like Marcus, who dragged me to late-night milkshake runs after exams, and Tessa, who laughed too loudly in class and became someone I found myself talking to more than I expected. I wasn't sure if it was a crush or just a feeling of being seen by someone who wasn't related to me, but whatever it was, it reminded me that connection didn't have to hurt. At the end of my first year, I earned a regional scholarship that covered most of my tuition, and for the first time, I felt proud of something that belonged entirely to me. By 21, I had transferred into a state university with a near full ride, landed an internship that turned into a junior tech support job, and signed a lease for my own small apartment. Nothing fancy but mine, a place where the only voices belong to me, not parents telling me what a real man does. Meanwhile, every few months, my parents found a new number to text me from, each message more delusional than the last. Families forgive. You abandoned us. You're being dramatic about that night. Dramatic. As if being left to die was an inconvenience. I blocked every number they used, 16 in total, but each block felt like reclaiming another inch of my sanity. Word spread through our old Florida community that my parents rebuilt a smaller home inland with leftover insurance money, pretending publicly that the storm changed them, while privately still refusing to acknowledge what happened, telling neighbors I ran off and cut them out for no reason, positioning themselves as victims in a story where they almost killed their son. I didn't correct them, I didn't respond, I didn't look back. Silence became my form of survival, and for a long time, it felt like peace. My life in North Carolina settled into a rhythm. Work, school, hanging out with friends, going to therapy, learning to cook simple meals, laughing again, sleeping without fear the roof would fall in. I bought a used car. I set up my first real workspace with a secondhand desk. I started running in the mornings. For the first time, I wasn't living reactively. I was living. Sometimes, Tessa would sit on the hood of my car in the parking lot after class, legs swinging, talking about her dreams and teasing me for being too serious. And in those moments, I wondered what life could look like if I wasn't constantly waiting for the past to crash through my door. The funny part was, it never occurred to me that my parents would actually come looking for me. Why would they? They had moved on with their lives. I had moved on with my life. Our paths were parallel lines that should never intersect again. At least that's what I thought, until one warm afternoon, 4 years after the hurricane, when I was carrying groceries up the stairs to my apartment and turned the corner to find two people sitting on the bench outside my door, dressed in clothes too heavy for the weather, faces pale, eyes sunken from stress or guilt or both. My father stood the moment he saw me. My mother clasped her hands like she was praying. My heart dropped into my stomach. 4 years of silence, 4 years of rebuilding, 4 years of becoming someone new, and there they were, as if summoned by some dark cosmic joke. My father opened his mouth to speak, and in that instant I knew. Whatever they wanted, whatever brought them across states to find me, it wasn't love. It never had been. My quiet, safe world wasn't just cracked open, it was about to be torn apart all over again. When I saw my parents sitting outside my apartment door after 4 years of absolute silence, it felt like the universe had cracked open and dumped every unresolved nightmare into my hallway, and I just stood there holding 2 plastic bags of groceries, frozen between running away and screaming because their presence felt like stepping into a ghost story I'd spent years trying to forget. My father stood first, shoulders squared like he was reporting for duty, and my mother followed a second later, clasping my name between her trembling lips like she had earned the right to say it, but all I felt was that sick, familiar tightening in my chest. The one I thought therapy had finally loosened. "Lucas," she whispered, like it was some sacred word instead of a name they once left to die in a collapsing house. I didn't say anything. I just unlocked my door, stepped inside, and waited. They followed me without asking, like they still believed they had automatic permission to invade my life. My father walked around like he was inspecting a rental unit, judging every detail, while my mother hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome. And she wasn't. Finally, I said, "Why are you here?" Not because I wanted an answer, but because I needed the sound of my own voice to remind myself this was my space, my life, not theirs. My father cleared his throat and gave me that same stern, authoritative look he used to give right before blaming me for something ridiculous. "We came because we need to talk to you," he said, as if the last 4 years were just a short vacation. Then came the line I've been dreading. "We're your parents, Lucas. You owe us that much." It hit me so hard I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so extreme it almost felt like satire. I said, "I don't owe you anything." And my father's face twisted like I'd just spit on him. My mother tried softening things with her usual guilt-laced tone, saying, "We've been struggling, things have been hard, and we didn't know who else to turn to." And I could already feel the manipulation crawling through her words like mold. They hadn't come for closure or guilt or to apologize. No, they came because they needed something. That was the only time they knew how to show up. I kept my arms crossed and asked again, "Why are you here?" My father took a deep breath, the kind he used to take before lecturing me about responsibility, and said, "We're drowning in debt." Apparently, the smaller home they rebuilt after the hurricane had foundation issues, cracks running through the walls, pipes bursting, the roof sagging. "Defective construction," they said, but then my father's voice dropped lower and he added, "Insurance denied our claim." He looked at me as if expecting sympathy, but I just waited for the rest because I could tell he wasn't done unloading their crisis on me. My mother stepped closer, wringing her hands like she was squeezing water out of her fingers. "We applied for a loan, several loans, but no one will approve us without a cosigner," she said. Her eyes finally met mine and I saw the desperation in them, but beneath that desperation was something colder. Expectation. Entitlement. Like this was my predetermined role in their story, the obedient son who sacrifices everything to fix their bad decisions. My father gripped the back of my chair like he owned it and said, "We need you to co-sign, and to send some money for repairs, at least until we get back on our feet." I stared at him, waiting for the part where they'd at least try to acknowledge they abandoned me. But instead he added, "And it's time for you to come home." Come home. Those words were so absurd I felt dizzy. The home they left me to die in? The home that collapsed while they sped away? The home that wasn't even standing anymore? I said, "Why would I ever go back?" And my father snapped, "Because we're your parents." Like that alone was a complete explanation. Then he said the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. "You're alive because of us. It's time to pay that back." My mouth went dry. My hands shook because that line, those exact words, proved everything I already knew. They felt no guilt, none. Not a trace of remorse for leaving me trapped in that collapsing house. In their minds, they were the heroes of their own delusion, and I was ungrateful for daring to survive without them. I told them I wasn't giving them a cent, I wasn't co-signing anything, and I sure as hell wasn't coming back. My father's expression darkened like a storm cloud forming on the horizon. "Don't be dramatic," he barked. That night was chaos. We thought you were behind us. My mother nodded quickly, adding, everything happened so fast, Lucas. We were scared. But fear doesn't explain driving several blocks away without checking if your son was in the truck. Fear doesn't justify ignoring him for 3 days. Fear doesn't excuse texting. Hope you made it out too. I said, no again, firmer, and my father slammed his fist on my dining table so hard the salt shaker jumped. You think you can just ignore your responsibilities? You think you can cut us out and pretend we're not your family? I felt something inside me break, not a soft break like sadness, but a sharp break, like cutting a chain that's been choking you forever. You're not my family, I said. My mother's face crumpled and my father's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it hurt. But neither of them disagreed. They just stood there, letting the silence swallow the truth they never wanted to hear. Finally, in a quieter voice, my father said something that set off alarms in my head. The locked room, it was destroyed in the collapse. My stomach nodded. He wasn't mentioning it casually. He was checking my reaction. My mother added too quickly, everything that was in there is gone, so there's nothing for you to worry about. That phrasing was strange, like the room had been a threat, not a secret storage space. My father continued, unless you, then cut himself off, eyes narrowing, studying me with suspicion I hadn't seen since childhood. That's when it hit me. They weren't scared about debt. They weren't scared about losing their house. They were scared of what I might know. Scared of what I might have seen the night the door burst open during the hurricane. Scared of what evidence of theirs might still be out there. Something in that room mattered more than me, more than the house, more than anything, and they thought I might have stumbled onto it. I felt the shift in the air, the panic in their voices, the way they exchanged looks like they were calculating something. Whatever was behind that locked door had been the center of their world, and now it was gone, and they were terrified. Not because it was destroyed, but because they didn't know what I saw. I straightened, letting calm settle over me, and said, I don't know what you're talking about. But inside, gears were turning. If they came all the way here, desperate and scared, asking for money but more afraid of a destroyed room, then something bigger was happening. Something I needed answers to. They left shortly after that, my father muttering curses under his breath and my mother trying one last guilt attempt. We're all we have left, Lucas. Don't do this. But when the door shut behind them, it felt like exile finally had a border. I leaned back against the door, breathing hard, and for the first time in 4 years, the past felt close enough to touch. They thought the locked room was gone forever, but I remembered the flash I saw when it burst open during the storm. The bins, the metallic shape, the desk. If they were so terrified of what I might know, then whatever they hid wasn't lost. It was still out there somewhere, and I was going to find out what it was, because if my parents were going to drag themselves back into my life, then I was done running from the shadows of my childhood. It was time to drag every secret they buried into the light. I didn't plan on going back to Louisiana, but there was something about the way my parents said, the locked room is gone now, so there's nothing for you to dig up, that lodged itself in my brain like a splinter I couldn't ignore. And 3 days after they showed up at my apartment demanding I fix their lives, I found myself driving down the same stretch of highway I once escaped from at 18. My palms sweating as the landscape slowly shifted from clean North Carolina suburbs to the moss-draped, humid roads of my childhood, and every mile felt like peeling back a scar that never fully healed. But I kept going because I needed answers, real answers, not the manipulative nonsense my parents always fed me. The closer I got to our old neighborhood, the more I saw the ghosts of Hurricane Seraphine everywhere. Empty lots where houses once stood, rusted street signs bent in half, foundation slabs swallowed by weeds, and the sickening sight of my old street sign half faded but still standing like a tombstone, marking the grave of my childhood. And when I finally reached the spot where our house used to be, I froze because nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for how wrong everything looked. The house wasn't just destroyed, it was erased, like something had clawed through it deliberately, leaving only splintered wood, cracked tiles, and a blackened outline where the foundation once rested, and standing there felt like looking at the skeleton of every memory I ever had. I hadn't expected anyone to be there, but as I stepped onto what used to be our driveway, a voice behind me said, "Lucas?" And I spun around to see Mr. Alvarez, older, thinner, his hair more gray than black, but unmistakably him, standing with a cane and a cautious but warm smile. And for the first time since arriving, I felt something other than dread. He hugged me. A real hug, not the forced shoulder squeeze my father used to give me when he wanted to show off that he was a good dad. And when we stepped back, he studied my face like he was making sure I was really alive. "Didn't think I'd see you return here?" he said, and I laughed nervously, telling him I didn't think I would either, but something kept pulling me back. He nodded slowly, his expression darkening in a way that set off alarms in my chest. "Your parents came by last year," he said quietly, glancing around like he was afraid someone might be listening. They were looking for something in the rubble. Spent hours digging. That sentence alone made my blood run cold, because what could they possibly come back for in a place that ended our relationship, a place they fled from without me? I asked him what they were digging for, and that's when he motioned for me to follow him toward the area where the locked room used to be. The same room I was never allowed to enter growing up. The same room my father guarded like it held the universe's secrets. The same room that survived every remodel except the last one when the storm ripped it open. The air around that part of the foundation felt heavier, like the ground remembered everything that happened, and Mr. Alvarez took a deep breath before speaking. "Lucas, there's something I need to tell you before you see what's left," he said, lowering himself onto a piece of concrete as his cane wobbled. "Your parents weren't the people you thought they were, not even close." I told him that much I already knew. After all, parents don't leave their son to die in a hurricane unless they're monsters. But he shook his head saying, "No, mijo, I mean something worse." He explained that back when I was 15, he had overheard my father arguing on the phone with someone about numbers not matching and needing more accounts, and at the time, he didn't think much of it. Everyone around here hustled in some way to survive. But then, over the next few years, he saw strangers come and go from our house at odd hours, always leaving from that locked room, and he noticed how nervous my mother was every time they left. One day, a year before the hurricane, he'd asked her if everything was okay, and she told him in a panic never to mention the room again, that it was for Lucas's future, and she walked away shaking. As he spoke, something in my stomach twisted so violently I had to steady myself. "Your father was doing something illegal," he continued, "and your name came up more than once." He said this with a sadness that felt heavier than the debris around us, and when I asked him what he meant exactly, he swallowed hard and looked toward the ruins. "They were setting you up," he said, and that sentence felt like being punched in the chest, "to take the fall. If everything went bad, they were going to blame you. Your accounts, your records, your name." The world began to tilt, but I forced myself to stay upright as he explained that months before the hurricane, he saw my father carrying boxes into the locked room. Metal cash boxes, stacks of papers, even a desktop computer tower, and that he overheard him telling someone on the phone that the kid won't know what hit him, and it'll solve everything if the timing lines up. And suddenly everything, every weird moment, every strange vibe, every time I was discouraged from touching mail or asking questions about bills, clicked into place in the worst way. My parents weren't just selfish, they were planning something. And the hurricane, God, the hurricane might not just have been bad luck. "Your parents only panicked when the levee broke because they remembered something," Mr. Alvarez said quietly. "Something in that room they couldn't let anyone else find." I asked him what happened to the room and whether anything survived, and he nodded slowly, pointing to a half-buried corner of the foundation where metal glinted under the dirt. "A box," he said. "Heavy. Your father tried to get it out last year but couldn't lift it." My heart hammered as I walked toward it, my shoes crunching over broken tiles and twisted metal, and I knelt beside what looked like a rusted steel case wedged under a concrete slab. I dug with my bare hands until my fingers were coated in mud and dust, and after almost 20 minutes of clawing and pulling, I freed it. A thick, dented lockbox the size of a suitcase, scratched but still intact. My pulse was so loud it drowned out the cicadas as I pried off the weakened AITA latch with a piece of rebar and pushed open the lid. Inside, God, inside was the kind of thing that makes your vision go white around the edges. Documents, hundreds of them, bundled with rubber bands, some water damaged but still readable, a bag of cash soaked but salvageable, an external hard drive, a laptop charred at the edges, and worst of all, papers with my name on them. Not just my name, my signature, my forged signature. My breath caught as I lifted one document, a bank transfer authorization for $42,000 from an account under my name I had never heard of. Another was a fake police report, claiming I had confessed to opening fraudulent accounts as a minor to help my family during financial hardship, signed with handwriting. Except it wasn't my handwriting. It was someone trying to mimic it. More pages revealed money laundering transactions, checks endorsed with my signature, even a freaking life insurance claim filed under the category natural disaster loss, dependent minor fatality. They filed paperwork for my death before the hurricane even hit. I stared at that last document for so long I didn't hear Mr. Alvarez walk up behind me until he gently touched my shoulder and said, "Lucas, they were counting on you dying." My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. The hurricane, the panic, the sudden change in attitude, they didn't leave me behind by accident. They didn't forget me. They didn't assume I'd follow. They wanted me gone. A dead son meant no investigation, no trial, no loose ends. A dead son meant they could claim insurance for the house, the life insurance payout, debt forgiveness, and a clean slate with new identities. My entire life, every moment of control, every guilt trip, every time my father said, "A man protects his home," it wasn't about teaching responsibility. It was about conditioning me to stay put when danger came. They didn't want me to escape the hurricane. They wanted me to die in it. I sank onto the dirt, shaking so badly the papers fluttered out of my hands, and Mr. Alvarez sat beside me, despite his weak knees, placing a steady hand on my back as I tried to process the kind of betrayal that doesn't just break a heart, it obliterates it. "I'm sorry, mijo," he whispered. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't know how deep it went, but you deserve to know the truth." For a long moment, I just sat there, numb, staring at the evidence of how disposable I was to the people who were supposed to love me. And then something inside me snapped. Not in a destructive way, but in a clear, icy way, like a lens finally coming into focus. They wanted me dead so they could save themselves. They wanted to rewrite the story of their lives with me as a tragic footnote. But I survived. I survived because of the man sitting beside me, not because of the people who created me. And now that I knew the truth, I wasn't going to let them keep running from it. I wasn't the weak, scared kid they left behind anymore. I was an adult with proof strong enough to bury them legally and morally. I closed the lockbox, stood up, and told Mr. Alvarez, "It's time to finish what they started." And for the first time since the hurricane, I didn't feel scared of the past. I felt ready to burn the truth into the light where they couldn't twist it anymore. I always imagined that if the day ever came when I confronted my parents about everything they'd done to me, I'd be shaking, yelling, maybe even throwing things just to feel like I finally had some power in the room. But when I pulled into the driveway of their new, half-finished house, one that looked more like a stripped-down box than a home, I felt strangely calm, almost detached, like whatever version of me once needed their approval had died back in that hurricane. And what remained was a man who came only for answers and closure. So I parked, grabbed the battered lockbox from the passenger seat, and walked up the steps without giving myself time to hesitate. My father opened the door before I could knock, almost like he'd been watching from the window, and the moment his eyes landed on the metal box in my hand, all the bluster he'd shown in North Carolina evaporated so fast it was almost comical, replaced by this pale, twitchy panic that told me he knew exactly what I had found. "Lucas," he said, trying to sound stern, but his voice cracked, and my mother appeared behind him, clutching a dish towel, her face draining of color as she stared at the box like it was radioactive. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, walked straight to their living room, which was barely furnished, just a couch and a cheap coffee table, and set the box down with a heavy metallic thud that echoed thought through the unfinished house. My father attempted to puff his chest again, saying something like, "You can't just barge into our home," but I cut him off by opening the lid and pulling out the first stack of papers with my forged signature on them, laying them out on the table one by one, like I was dealing cards at a casino where the loser didn't just lose money. They lost everything. "I want you to explain these," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. And the silence that followed was so thick it felt like the air had weight. My mother's hands flew to her mouth as she sank onto the couch, whispering, "Oh God," while my father took a step back, then forward, then back again, clearly trying to decide whether intimidation or denial would serve him better, and ultimately landing on denial because that was always his first refuge. "You don't understand what you're looking at," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the documents like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something innocent. Those are just precautions, business precautions. You don't know anything about adult responsibilities, Lucas." I laughed, actually laughed, because the absurdity of him lecturing me about responsibility when he would try to kill me through paperwork and natural disaster was almost too ridiculous to process. And I asked him if insurance fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and filing a claim for my death before I was dead counted as good adult responsibilities. Because if so, I apparently missed an important chapter in the handbook. My father's expression hardened, and for a second I saw the man he always was during my childhood, the rigid, authoritarian presence who treated every disagreement like an act of war. And he stepped closer, puffing himself up, lowering his voice into that tone meant to make me feel small. "You listen to me," he said, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You don't get to come into my home and accuse me of..." But he didn't get to finish because I dropped the next bombshell on the table. The life insurance claim filed for my minor fatality, complete with dates and signatures and details I had never provided. My mother let out this broken little sob that sounded like something cracking inside her, and she reached for the document with trembling hands before pulling them back, like touching it might burn her. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. And that single line made me angrier than anything else, because it was the same half apology she used my entire childhood whenever she stood behind my father's cruelty, sorry in tone, but never willing to confront the actual harm. "You left me in a hurricane," I said quietly, and both of them froze like I'd just spoken a forbidden word. "You left me to die because dying was more convenient than facing consequences. You filed for insurance money before Seraphine even hit. You forged my signature. You created bank accounts under my name. You wrote a fake police statement claiming I confessed, and now you're telling me it went too far?" My father snapped then, slamming his fist onto the coffee table hard enough to rattle the empty house. "We had no choice," he shouted, his face turning red, his hands shaking. "We were drowning. You don't understand what it's like to work your whole life and still lose everything. We did what we had to do to keep this family alive." I stared at him, stunned by how deeply he believed that narrative, and said, "You didn't keep the family alive. You tried to kill me to save yourselves." My mother broke into tears, real heaving sobs, but even in her breakdown, she refused to take responsibility. "We didn't know how bad it would get," she cried. "We never wanted you hurt, Lucas. You're our son." And God, hearing her say that, made something dark twist inside me, because I finally understood that she wanted the comfort of calling me her son without the accountability of treating me like one. So I opened the lockbox again and pulled out the hard drive and the burned laptop, placing them next to the piles of forged documents. "Insurance investigators will have a field day with all of this," I said, watching both of their faces drain of color. "Police too, fraud division, cybercrime, maybe even the state attorney." My father's mouth dropped open like I'd slapped him. "What did you do?" he asked, voice trembling, and I looked him dead in the eye and said the words I'd been waiting to say for years. "I already turned everything in." My mother let out a strangled gasp, and my father started pacing, grabbing his hair with both hands, muttering, "No, no, no, he wouldn't do that to us." But then he stopped pacing and turned on my mother with a venom I had never seen him use on her before. "This is your fault," he barked. "You said he wouldn't do anything. You said he wouldn't dig." My mother's sobs turned panicked as she shook her head violently, saying, "You told me to tell him that. You said he wasn't smart enough to figure it out." And watching them turn on each other like wild animals fighting over scraps was surreal. They weren't the powerful, controlling figures of my childhood anymore. They looked small, desperate, messy. Two people scrambling to shift blame faster than they could breathe. My father grabbed the forged police report and waved it in my mother's face, shouting that she should have burned everything, that she should have kept track of the lockbox, that she never listened, and my mother screamed back that he should have never involved their own son, that she begged him to stop, that he always pushed things too far. It was chaos, pure and unfiltered, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't part of it. I wasn't the child being yelled at. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the punching bag. I was the one standing there with truth in my hand and power in my pocket. My father stopped shouting long enough to turn back to me and say, "Lucas, please. You don't know what prison is like. We won't survive." My mother reached toward me with shaking hands, pleading, "We're your family. You can't do this. Families protect each other." That line, "families protect each other," hit me like a punch, because that's exactly what they didn't do. Not once, not ever. So I picked up the lockbox, closed it, and said, "You left me to die. I don't owe you anything." My father started toward me like he wanted to grab my arm, maybe to physically stop me, but his knees buckled and he collapsed onto the floor instead, staring at the documents like they were tombstones. My mother slid down the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering, "Please don't do this, please, please." But her pleas didn't reach me, not because I was cold, but because they weren't really apologies. They were desperation. They wanted salvation, not redemption, and I wasn't their savior. I walked to the door slowly, calmly, the same calm that guided me when I first arrived, and as I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me in a way that felt symbolic, cliche even, but real. Bright, warm, and completely separate from the darkness behind me. I turned back only once, not to see if they were chasing after me, but to confirm something I'd never allowed myself to believe until now. They had no power over me anymore. Not emotionally, not legally, not in any way. They weren't giants. They weren't monsters. They were just small, scared people who built their lives on rot and expected me to carry the weight of their decay. And I was done carrying anything for them. Completely done. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the hurricane. Freedom. Pure and absolute. Like the air after a storm finally clears and you realize you survived something that should have killed you. I got in, closed the door, started the engine, and drove away without looking back, leaving behind not just their house, but the entire version of myself that ever wondered if they loved me. Because now I knew the truth. They never did. And now, finally, they would face the consequences they spent their entire lives running from. In the weeks after I walked out of my parents' collapsing excuse of a home, everything in my life felt strangely quiet, like the world had taken a deep breath after years of holding it in. And for the first time since Hurricane Seraphine ripped through Louisiana and tore apart every illusion I had about family, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. Instead, I watched from a distance as consequences, real, legal, unstoppable consequences, finally caught up to the two people who had treated me like a financial asset with a pulse. It started with a call from the insurance investigator who'd taken my report with the careful patience of someone who'd seen too many fraud cases but still believed in justice. He told me in a measured tone that the discrepancies in my parents' claim had flagged multiple agencies simultaneously, and they were coordinating with state fraud units, the IRS, and local authorities. And though he made it clear I wouldn't be dragged into the middle of it, beyond verifying my identity and confirming the forged paperwork wasn't mine, the gravity in his voice told me this wasn't a slap on the wrist situation. Then came the IRS letter, not to me, but forwarded through my lawyer. Yes, I have a lawyer now. Trauma has a way of making you allergic to unprotected vulnerability, and the letter detailed investigations into suspicious financial activity linked to multiple fraudulent accounts, all under my name but traced back to my parents' devices, their IP addresses, and their signatures. Meanwhile, the police contacted me to confirm a timeline for the night of the hurricane and to ask questions about the locked room, and though recounting that night still made my chest tighten in a way that felt like a scar flaring under cold air, I found that, for the first time, I could talk about it without feeling like I was drowning. I didn't shake, I didn't cry, I didn't freeze, I just told the truth plainly. And the officer taking notes gave this tiny nod every time I paused. Not out of pity, but out of respect, like he understood what it meant for someone like me to stand on the other side of survival and speak without fear. And while all that storm of legal fallout churned through my parents' lives, mine kept moving in a direction I never believed possible at 18 years old. Bruised, soaked, gasping for breath under the collapsed remains of the home that was never a home. I kept working at my tech job, coding late into the night with headphones on and coffee cooling too fast on my desk, and I enrolled in another semester of classes because for once I wasn't studying to escape, I was studying to build. My circle grew slowly but honestly. A coworker named Elijah who invited me to casual board game nights, a friend from class, Nia, who had a laugh like sunlight and a tendency to bring me snacks when she noticed I forgot lunch, and maybe, a budding something with a girl named Marissa from my database systems group project. Though I wasn't rushing anything because healing taught me that the best things grow quietly, without force. Therapy helped too, not in the cliche TV show way where the therapist asks, "And how does that make you feel?" but in the real way where someone finally helps you untangle the knots you didn't realize had become part of who you were. We talked about guilt, not mine, but the phantom guilt, left over from years of emotional manipulation. We talked about the night of the hurricane, not as a trauma, but as a turning point. We talked about how survival sometimes looks less like fighting and more like letting go. And slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, I started waking up without bracing for something to fall apart. I started breathing deeper, laughing more, trusting people again in small, cautious ways. For the first time in my 22 years, life wasn't about running from anything. It was about choosing where to go. Every few days, my phone buzzed with updates from investigators, each one confirming that the walls were closing in on parents. Charges recommended, subpoenas issued, flags raised on every account they touched. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was no pleasure in watching them unravel, only a sense of inevitability, like gravity, doing what gravity does. I didn't want revenge, and I didn't want them suffering. Hell, I didn't even want them in prison, not because they didn't deserve it, but because prison wouldn't fix anything inside me. It wouldn't rewrite the hurricane night or erase the years before it. No, what I wanted, what I had always wanted, was truth and closure, and I already had both. I thought that would be the end of it, the final untangling of the last thread tying me to them. But then, on a Thursday morning, when the sky was bright and the air smelled like rain, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I ignore unknown numbers, but something made me answer, maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, and when I did, I heard my mother's voice. Thin, fragile, desperate in a way that was nothing like the cries she used to manipulate me as a child. "Lucas," she whispered, and for a moment I didn't even breathe. She sounded older, smaller. "Your father, they're saying he might be charged. They're saying we could lose everything. Can you please talk to them? Help us?" Her voice wavered, like she was trying to keep it steady, but the cracks were leaking through anyway, and before I could respond, she added the line that made every muscle in my body go cold. "How could you do this to us?" I didn't yell. I didn't shake. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Instead, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not triumph, but clarity, clean and simple, like a window finally wiped clear after years of grime. Because in that moment, I realized something huge. They still didn't understand. They still thought this was something I did to them, not something they did to themselves. They still thought their suffering was my betrayal, not karma correcting a ledger they thought no one would ever read. So I waited a long moment, long enough that I could hear her breathing quicken on the other end, and then I said the words that had been sitting in my chest for 4 years, growing roots until they finally had the strength to stand. "You left me to die for a house. Why would you expect me to save you now?" There was silence, real, absolute silence, like the world paused just to acknowledge the truth dropping between us. And then I hung up, not with anger, not with satisfaction, not with drama, just finality. Afterwards, I went for a walk on a trail near my apartment, a place with tall pines and a creek that sounded like soft static. And as I walked, I thought about that night again, the wind, the water rising, the crushing weight of debris on my chest. The moment I thought it was over, the moment Mr. Alvarez pulled me out, the sight of my parents driving away without looking back. But this time, when the memory surfaced, it didn't squeeze my lungs or twist my stomach or make me feel like I was trapped under that roof again. It just felt like a story someone else lived and survived. Not because I forgot, but because I had grown past the version of me who was trapped there. Healing doesn't erase the past. It just stops the past from owning you. And as I reached the overlook, where the creek widened and sunlight sparkled across the water, I realized something with a kind of soft, quiet certainty. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't the abandoned kid. I wasn't the boy begging for his parents' love. I was Lucas, 22 years old, breathing free air, building a life that was mine, surrounded by people who chose me, not because they needed something from me, but because they simply cared. My parents would face whatever came next, but I wouldn't be part of it. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. Sometimes walking away isn't cruelty, it's survival. So when people ask me now why I won't help them, why I let the investigations run their course, why I don't step in to fix what they broke, I tell them the truth. Because the people who left me to die don't get to call me back to save them. Because I'm done carrying burdens that were never mine. Because sometimes the strongest, bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. And I finally did. The end. My sister destroyed my relationship because she couldn't have her one true love. So I made her watch him fall for me instead. I always thought the weirdest thing about being a twin was sharing a birthday, but that was before I realized the real curse was sharing a life with someone who wanted to crawl inside your skin and take it from the inside out. Someone who looked like you, but somehow believed your happiness belonged to her. Someone who could smile like a sister while slowly hollowing out every part of your world. I'm Haley, 26, living in Portland, and if anyone had told me when I was younger that my twin sister Claire would one day destroy everything I loved because she couldn't have a boy she'd been obsessed with since we were 15, I would have laughed, brushed it off, maybe blamed hormones or teenage intensity, because back then her obsession with Ethan seemed almost harmless. Teenage crush, harmless. Embarrassing Pinterest boards, harmless. Doodling his initials in journals, harmless. But the problem with Claire is that nothing about her stays harmless for long. Claire's fixation on Ethan started the day he moved into the blue house across the street, stepping out of a U-Haul with messy black hair and a shy smile that made half the neighborhood moms rush to welcome cookies onto his doorstep. We were 15, he was 16, and I watched Claire's eyes lock onto him like a predator spotting prey. She didn't just like him, she devoured him. She made Pinterest boards titled Future Wedding Vibes, pretended they were for a school project. She created fake Instagram accounts to follow his friends so she could learn his social circle. She memorized his sports schedules and strategically walked home the same time he did. She even once copied the exact hoodie his favorite band merch store sold so she could match. At first, I thought she was just being dramatic. Claire has always been intense. Where I grew into my emotions, Claire drowned in hers. Where I found comfort in quiet, Claire needed noise, validation, attention, obsession. But things escalated from quirky to disturbing fast. By sophomore year, Ethan noticed. By junior year, he was uncomfortable. By senior year, he pulled me aside after calculus and said, "Your sister watches me." Like, literally watches. I apologized, mortified. He waved it off with that gentle, patient smile he always had, but I could tell it bothered him deeply. When Claire finally worked up the nerve to confess her love to him senior year behind the gym, he handled it well. Kind, respectful, clear. "I'm sorry, Claire," he told her. "I'm not interested. I don't feel that way." Most people would cry, maybe avoid the person, maybe vent to a friend. Claire didn't just break, she detonated. She came home silent, which was unusual for someone whose emotions usually spilled everywhere. And the next morning, she was cold in a way I'd never seen. She didn't cry, didn't rage, she redirected toward me. It started small. Little comments, subtle digs, criticizing my clothes, my friendships, my choices. But I shrugged it off because sisters fight, right? Then I got my first boyfriend, Jake, freshman year of college, and Claire found a new hobby, seeing how quickly she could unravel every good thing in my life. When I told her Jake and I were getting serious, Claire acted thrilled. "Finally, someone worth your time," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 2 weeks later, Jake started pulling away, saying I seemed guarded, closed off, hard to trust. I didn't know where he got that idea. Later, I found out Claire had taken him out for coffee to get to know him, and casually mentioned my deep trust issues from childhood trauma I didn't even have. Jake left me 3 weeks later, saying he couldn't handle the emotional load. I was confused and hurt, but Claire hugged me, rubbing my back as if she weren't the one who lit the fuse. When Brandon came the next year, a sweet, nerdy guy who wrote poetry in his phone notes and loved surprising me with cheap flowers, Claire played supportive again. "He's adorable, Hales," she said. "Don't mess this up." 2 months in, I found my sophomore year journal, which had been buried in a box, sitting open on Brandon's desk. The pages were turned to entries about my exes, where I'd been venting teenage frustrations and insecurities. Brandon, hurt and jealous, accused me of still being hung up on old crushes. I knew immediately how that journal ended up there. Claire had helped me move into my new place the week before. She knew exactly where that journal was. Brandon left without letting me explain. Every loss hurt a little more, but Claire always positioned herself as my comfort, my support, my only real family. She made sure I felt dependent on her. Looking back, it was grooming, a long, slow erosion of my confidence until she could control the outcome of every relationship I had. But nothing compared to Chris. Chris was the one I truly saw a future with. We'd been together 20 months, longer than anyone I dated, and we were already looking at rings. He was the kind of guy who remembered the way I took my coffee, who left sticky notes on my bathroom mirror, who held my hand when I had panic attacks after the mess with Brandon. Claire, of course, acted thrilled. She insisted on helping us apartment hunt, recommended furniture, even helped me pick outfits for date nights. "I just want my sister to be happy," she'd say with that nauseatingly sweet tone. I believed her. God, I was stupid. The night everything combusted, I was in my night class at PCC, texting Chris that I'd bring takeout home as a surprise. Claire told me she was staying in for a self-care night. Instead, she invited Chris over under the guise of helping plan something for your anniversary. She offered him wine. Chris only drinks casually, but said she insisted. She slipped something into it. Later, toxicology tests would confirm a fast-acting sedative. When I walked through the door carrying Thai food, excited and tired, the world snapped in half. Chris was slumped on the couch, shirt askew, eyes half open but not seeing. Claire was sitting on his lap in her bra, taking selfies of herself, leaning over him. My brain froze. My lungs stopped. She looked up at me with this perfect performance of shock, clutching her chest like she'd been caught doing something heroic instead of horrifying. "Haley, oh my God. I don't know what happened. He just kissed me," she gasped, already reaching for her phone. She had already texted me the photos. "I'm so sorry you had to see this," the message read. I remember screaming. I remember Chris trying to stand, mumbling, "Haley, no, wait, I don't," before collapsing back onto the cushions. I remember Claire pretending to cover herself while smirking when she thought I wasn't looking. Everything after that was chaos. Chris cried when the drug test came back positive. He apologized for weeks, but the damage, the doubt was already eating us alive. Even with evidence, even knowing something was wrong, neither of us could look past the ugliness of what we'd seen. It killed us. 6 weeks later, I broke up with him. I cried for days, but the day everything inside me changed wasn't the breakup, it was the confrontation. I walked into Claire's bathroom while she was doing some stupid hair mask, wearing a robe, scrolling her phone like she hadn't ruined 2 lives. I told her I knew everything. I told her she was sick, dangerous, twisted. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She didn't even blink. She looked at me in the mirror with this lazy, amused expression and said, "Ethan will never love anyone, so why should you get to be happy?" My throat closed. My stomach flipped. She kept going, casually rubbing conditioner into her hair. "You've always taken things that weren't yours. Friends, attention, happiness, now we're even." That's when everything connected. All the sabotage, all the coincidences, all the heartbreaks, all the lies. My own twin sister had decided my life was hers to dismantle because a boy she'd been obsessed with since we were kids rejected her. I walked out shaking. I didn't talk to her for days. Then Ethan, of all people, gave me the final piece that snapped the last thread holding me back. I ran into him at the grocery store. Pure coincidence. And when he asked why I looked so drained, I told him everything. Not the whole truth at first, but enough. He hesitated, then said, "Haley, this won't be easy to hear." He told me Claire used to climb his fence at night when we were in high school. He told me he once woke up to see her sitting under his window at 2 a.m., just staring. He told me he installed cameras because he was scared she'd break in. He said she once waited behind his garage for hours just to accidentally bump into him during his morning run. Every word felt like ice water down my spine. I had known Claire was intense, but I hadn't realized she was dangerous. To him, to me, to anyone who got between her and what she wanted. I went home that night and stared at myself in the mirror, really stared, and realized I had spent my entire life living reactively, dodging her outbursts, compensating for her jealousy, shrinking myself to avoid her anger. I had been surviving her, not living. Something in me hardened. A quiet, steady voice inside said, "No more." I didn't know what standing up to Claire would look like yet. I didn't have a plan or a revenge scheme or even clarity. I only knew one thing. I was done being her victim. I was done letting her write the story of my life like some unhinged puppeteer. That night, for the first time in years, I locked my bedroom door. Not because I thought Claire would physically hurt me, but because I finally understood the truth. My sister wasn't just jealous. She wasn't just hurt. She wasn't just insecure. She was obsessed, unhinged, willing to ruin anyone who stood between her and the fantasy world she believed she deserved. And I was finally, fully ready to stop her. I just didn't know yet that Ethan would become the center of it all. That he would be the one thing she wanted most, and the one thing she could never have. And that, for once, I wasn't planning on stepping aside and letting her take everything from me ever again. I woke up the morning after everything with my chest aching in that dull, bruised way grief settles into the ribs. The kind of heaviness that makes you feel like your heart is a physical weight you're dragging from room to room. But something in me also felt strangely clear, like the storm inside me had finally burned out and left behind this cold, steady quiet that wasn't peace exactly, but wasn't fear anymore either. It was the first morning in years I didn't feel like Claire's shadow was pressed against my back, waiting for me to breathe wrong, love wrong, exist wrong. I got out of bed and forced myself into a routine. Real, grounding, mine. I put on running shoes I hadn't touched in months and stepped outside into Portland's gray morning air, cool enough to sting my lungs in that refreshing way. Jogging wasn't something I'd ever committed to before, but that morning my body needed movement, an outlet, something to shake off the last pieces of Claire's poison. I wasn't running from her anymore, but I was definitely running from who she turned me into. And that's when it happened. The first accidental moment with Ethan since the grocery store talk. Though at the time, I didn't recognize it as fate trying to nudge me forward. He was across the street, hoodie on, walking Max, his golden retriever, who was joyfully dragging him toward a patch of grass. Ethan looked up, did a double take, and smiled with that soft, warm expression I'd forgotten he had. The kind that settled low in my stomach and made me forget there was still broken glass inside me. "Morning, Hales," he said, using the nickname only a few people ever used. "Didn't know you were a runner now." I laughed breathlessly, wiping my forehead. "I'm not. I think I'm being chased by all my life choices." He snorted, then paused, clearly registering something in my face, something tired and heavy. "Rough night?" he asked. The concern in his eyes wasn't nosy or dramatic. It was gentle, real, and it hit harder than I expected. I shrugged, just figuring things out. He didn't push. He just nodded, tugged Max's leash, and said, "If you ever want company on these morning runs that don't involve actual running, we're always out here." And I swear Max wagged his tail like he agreed. We parted ways, but something in me kept replaying that moment during the rest of the run. The softness in his voice, the steadiness, the way he didn't need an explanation to care. It felt like sunlight through cracks. Over the next few days, the universe kept pushing us together. At the grocery store again, I dropped an entire bag of cereal because I was too tired to pay attention, and he happened to be right behind me. "Wow," he said, picking up the box. "You and your chaotic cereal choices strike again." I laughed so hard I choked, and he grinned like he was genuinely glad to see me laugh. We walked through a few aisles together, talking about stupid things like how he always burned pancakes or how I couldn't cook rice without ruining it. It was easy with him in a way I hadn't felt since before Claire twisted everything in my life. Every time we crossed paths, he seemed more open, more curious about me, asking small, thoughtful questions, remembering things I didn't know I'd said. And slowly, without either of us acknowledging it, he became a safe place. Someone I could talk to without filtering my words. Someone whose presence didn't make me brace for manipulation. But Claire, of course, noticed. She always noticed. The first time she saw us talking outside, she stood behind our living room blinds, barely hidden, her silhouette sharp and stiff like a predator watching something slip out of her control. I ignored her. For once, I refused to give her the reaction she wanted. That only seemed to feed her disgust. The more Ethan and I coincidentally crossed paths, the more Claire hovered, watching from windows, pretending to check the mail 5 times a day, timing her exits and entries to intersect with us. But her presence didn't scare me anymore. If anything, it fueled me. One afternoon, after another one of my awkward grocery mishaps where I accidentally knocked over a stack of tomato soup cans, Ethan laughed and said, "Okay, you clearly need supervision. When are you free for me to teach you how to cook something that doesn't end in mild destruction?" I felt my cheeks warm, not from embarrassment, but from the way he looked at me when he said it. Like this was something he genuinely wanted, like spending time with me wasn't an obligation or pity or habit. "Whenever you're brave enough," I teased. "Tonight?" he asked. My stomach flipped. "Yeah," I said. "Tonight." That night changed everything. We made homemade pizza, which was really just him being patient while I attempted to chop vegetables without losing a finger. We laughed so much my stomach hurt. At one point, his fingers brushed mine when we both reached for the same spice jar, and something electric moved through me. Sharp, warm, dangerous in the best way. He felt it too. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of heat he tried to hide by stepping back and clearing his throat. "Okay," he said lightly, trying to break the tension. "Next up, Thai curry night. You'll either love it or cry." "I can handle spice," I insisted. Spoiler alert, I absolutely could not. The curry was delicious, but so spicy it felt like my soul was melting out of my body, and he laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair while I chugged milk straight from the carton. When he realized I was genuinely suffering, he wiped tears from his eyes and apologized between laughs. And then, when I was finally able to breathe again, we just sat there, talking for hours. Not about big dramatic topics at first, just about family and jobs and stupid traditions and childhood memories. Until eventually, in the quiet that settled after midnight, he shifted and said softly, "Your sister, she's complicated, isn't she?" My heart tightened. "That's one word," I said. "I didn't realize how bad it was until we talked at the store," he admitted. "But even back in high school, she crossed lines." I swallowed hard. "You mentioned she used to watch you." He nodded, gaze darkening. "That wasn't the worst of it." He told me more, how she left notes in his mailbox with no name, written in looping handwriting he recognized from school assignments. How she once tried to follow him into his backyard when she thought he wasn't home. How she sat under his window for hours, silent, unmoving, staring at the light under his blinds. "I almost filed a restraining order," he said. "Honestly, I wish I had." The shock that hit me wasn't really shock, not the real kind. It was more like confirmation, validation, proof that I wasn't crazy for thinking Claire was darker than she pretended. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know it was that bad." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't your fault. You were just living your life. She was living in some fantasy." He didn't say it, but I felt the truth underneath. Claire's fantasy had always included him and excluded me. Our bond deepened after that night, not because of trauma or shared fear, but because Ethan made me feel seen without demanding anything. Because every time he looked at me, there was something warm and steady in his eyes, something that pulled me closer even when I tried to pretend I wasn't feeling it. The chemistry was intense, so intense it sometimes felt like the air between us crackled. I'd catch him looking at my mouth when I talked. He'd brush against me, accidentally, and linger a second too long. When he laughed at something I said, he leaned in like he couldn't help it. And every time, my heartbeat jumped, but I refused to rush anything. For the first time in years, I wanted something to grow naturally, not under pressure or fear or manipulation. Claire, of course, started trying new tactics. Suddenly, she was concerned about me again, hovering in the kitchen, asking invasive questions, dropping comments like, "You know Ethan only talks to you because he feels sorry, right?" Or, "I saw you two together. Kind of pathetic how obvious you look." I didn't react, not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't matter anymore. Claire's voice wasn't the narrator of my life anymore. Every time she tried to push my buttons, I looked at her with the kind of calm that infuriated her. I refused to give her power, and it broke her. I could see it in the way her eyes sharpened, the way her smile thinned, the way she clenched her jaw when I walked away from her mid-sentence. Then came the night Claire snapped again, but not in the way I expected. Ethan texted me. "You should see this." He sent a video from his backyard camera, Claire climbing his fence at midnight, wearing black, creeping toward his window, just like high school. My stomach dropped, but this time fear didn't paralyze me. It focused me. Because this wasn't just obsession anymore. This wasn't just jealousy or manipulation. This was escalation. And Ethan wasn't brushing it off. He wasn't minimizing it. He wasn't pretending it wasn't happening. He called me immediately, voice low and tight. "Haley, something's wrong with her." And looking at the video, watching my twin sister move like a stranger, I realized he was right. Something was wrong with her. Something had always been wrong with her. But for the first time, I wasn't the scared one. Claire was. Because she finally understood she wasn't in control anymore. Not of Ethan. Not of me. Not of the narrative she'd written in her head. And she had no idea what I planned to do next. The night Ethan and I finally became official didn't feel like some movie moment or fairy tale confession. It felt raw, vulnerable, and terrifyingly real. The kind of night where your entire life tilts in a new direction and you're suddenly aware you'll never be able to go back to the old version of yourself. And I guess that's why, when Ethan held me on his couch with Max curled at our feet and whispered that he didn't want to pretend we were just cooking buddies anymore, something inside me cracked open in a way I didn't expect. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to protect myself from being hurt. I was choosing to trust someone who had watched me fall apart and still reach for me anyway. And when I told him I felt the same, he just exhaled like he'd been waiting months to hear it. And that's the moment everything spiraled. Because the universe wasn't going to let me have something good without Claire trying to burn it all down. It started with my phone buzzing nonstop. Texts from Claire pouring in like a burst pipe. "Block him right now. You're making a fool of yourself. He doesn't want you. He never wanted you. He was supposed to be mine." And as I read them, my hands shook, not from fear, but from this strange mix of fury and pity, because it hit me in a sickening wave how deep her internal instability went, how long she'd been living in this warped fantasy where Ethan belonged to her. And the more I read, the clearer it became that she wasn't just jealous, she was unraveling. The kind of unraveling that makes people dangerous. And when I looked up from the phone, Ethan was already watching me, concern tightening his jaw, and he took the device gently from my hand and set it on the coffee table like it was something toxic, telling me he'd been expecting this, that Claire never handled rejection, even indirect rejection, without detonating some kind of emotional bomb. And then he stood up, went to his security system monitor, and pulled up a file labeled Claire Evidence, which I didn't even know existed until he clicked it, and a video popped up showing Claire at some sketchy pharmacy kiosk 2 towns over, buying a bottle of the exact sedative Chris tested positive for the night she staged that disgusting fake cheating scene. And I swear my body went cold, watching her casually slip the bottle into her purse, pay in cash, then look directly at the security camera with this eerie, practiced smile. Like she thought she was untouchable. Like she thought she'd never get caught. And I remember whispering, "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" And Ethan just said, "You weren't ready to see how far she really went." And he was right, because seeing it like that, seeing Claire's cruelty laid out in front of me, stripped away every childhood memory where I'd convinced myself she was just jealous or insecure or mean on accident. No, this was intentional, calculated harm. And before I could process it further, there was a knock at Ethan's front door, soft but urgent. And when he opened it, Chris was standing there, looking thinner than I remembered, eyes ringed with exhaustion but clearer than the last time I'd seen him. And he said he came because the detective on his case finally told him they'd found new digital evidence tied to Claire, and he needed to talk to me before things escalated legally, so we let him in. And I swear the tension in my stomach twisted because being in the same room with him brought back memories I hadn't fully buried. The confusion in his face that night, the betrayal I thought was real, the heartbreak that followed, and Chris sat on the edge of Ethan's couch like he wasn't sure he deserved to be comfortable, then told us that Claire had emailed him earlier that morning pretending to apologize, begging him to reconsider everything, claiming she had lied out of love, and offering some pathetic story about how she'd been manipulated by strangers online, hoping he'd feel guilty enough to drop the charges. But Chris said he didn't fall for it this time. Instead, he forwarded the emails to his lawyer and the police, and the detective told him that Claire's search history wasn't just incriminating, it was damning, full of queries about sedatives, digital framing techniques, burner accounts, and psychological manipulation tactics. And hearing all that while Chris rubbed his hands together like he was grounding himself made me realize that Claire hadn't just ruined my relationship, she had traumatized him too. And when he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Haley, for everything," I didn't even know how to respond because none of this was his fault. Not really. And before I could answer, Ethan told him about the pharmacy footage, and Chris's eyes widened, like someone had peeled back reality and forced him to look at the truth he'd been avoiding for almost a year. After he left, thanking us and promising he'd stand strong in court, Ethan turned to me with that protective fire in his eyes and said, "This is ending, Haley. She's not getting away with it." And I believed him, because for the first time in my life, someone besides me was ready to fight back. But Claire wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. Because later that night, as Ethan walked me to my car, we saw movement near the hedges bordering his yard. And at first we thought it was a stray cat, but then Max started growling low and sharp, and when Ethan turned on the floodlights, there she was. Claire, crouched behind the bushes like some feral creature, mascara smeared down her cheeks, hair tangled, clutching her phone like a weapon, and when the light hit her, she froze, like a deer realizing the car wasn't stopping, and she slowly stood up, staring at us with this hollow, betrayed expression as if we had wronged her by simply existing. And she screamed, "You stole my future, both of you," before bolting toward the side gate, only for Ethan to calmly tap his phone screen and reveal she had triggered his motion-activated cameras the moment she stepped onto his property. Meaning everything was recorded, including her trespassing, including the moment she hurled her phone at the pavement in rage, shattering it as she sobbed into the night. The police came the next morning after Ethan filed the footage as evidence, and I watched Claire sit on our childhood porch, rocking back and forth while officers questioned her, insisting she was the victim, that we were conspiring against her, that Ethan belonged to her, and I had poisoned him, and the sight of her like that should have broken me, but instead it solidified something deep and immovable. Claire wasn't just my cruel sister anymore. She was someone willing to destroy lives to feed a delusion, and I was done letting her dictate mine. Over the next week, everything accelerated. The lawsuit officially filed, Chris giving statements, Ethan submitting digital records, police pulling Claire's purchase logs, browser history, deleted accounts, all of it painting a picture she could no longer manipulate her way out of. And Claire spiraled harder, sending me long, unhinged emails blaming me for her collapse, accusing me of stealing her destiny, claiming Ethan and I only worked because she had softened him up, insisting that if I had never been born, she would have been happy. And I realized then how much of her resentment wasn't about Ethan at all. It was about me simply existing, about me breathing the same air she thought she deserved. And as the court date drew closer, Claire stopped pretending, stopped lying elegantly, and instead lashed out in every direction. At the neighbors, at coworkers, at our parents, at anyone who didn't immediately validate her fantasy. And each outburst became another piece of evidence proving what we already knew. The truth was finally surfacing, dragging her lies, her obsessions, her manipulations out into the daylight where she couldn't hide them anymore. And through it all, Ethan never wavered, sitting with me during the panic attacks, holding my hand as we reviewed statements, reminding me that none of this made me weak, that being hurt didn't mean I had failed. And one night, as we lay tangled under his blanket, the courtroom paperwork stacked on the table beside us, he whispered, "She can't take this from you, Haley. She can't take us." And in that moment, I knew he was right. Not because love magically fixes trauma, but because the truth always surfaces. And this time it was rising on our side, ready to drown every lie Claire ever built her life on. I always knew Claire had a special talent for rewriting reality in her head, but nothing prepared me for the level of obsession she descended into once Ethan and I were openly together. Because the moment the world stopped believing her lies and the courts started believing ours, she retreated into this warped mental universe where Ethan had been destined for her since we were 15 and I had somehow stolen him out of spite. And every day that passed made her more unhinged, more erratic, more certain that if she just screamed loudly enough, someone would hand her the life she believed she deserved. I saw it in the way she lingered in her bedroom window at all hours, blinds half open, watching Ethan's house like a predator studying prey, convinced he would eventually turn his head, spot her silhouette, and remember that she was the one he who loved him first. And honestly, if it wasn't so terrifying, it would have been pathetic. Because While she was unraveling behind curtains, Ethan and I were quietly building something real, slow, steady, honest, and healing in ways neither of us expected. And by the time our 3-month anniversary rolled around, it felt like we had lived 10 years worth of storms together. So when he planned a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just candles in his backyard and Max asleep beside us, it felt perfect. I didn't even realize how visible we were from Claire's window until I caught that familiar flicker of movement at the top of the blinds. And when Ethan followed my gaze and saw her thin, ghost-like shadow staring down at us, he didn't flinch, didn't pretend not to notice. He turned fully toward me with this soft, grounded expression, like he wanted every part of the world to see exactly what he felt. And he cut my face, whispered, "I choose you," and kissed me so fully and unapologetically that something inside me finally unlocked. Because for the first time in my entire life, someone's love for me wasn't something Claire could manipulate or poison or steal. And I felt my chest warm with this strange mix of relief and defiance, knowing she was watching from that window and realizing she could not control what was never hers. Later that night, my phone lit up like fireworks. Message after message from Claire. "You're a liar. You're a thief. You turned him against me. You have no idea what you've done. He said he loved me first. I hate you. I need you. Please answer. Please stop. Please don't do this." And the whiplash between rage and desperation was so extreme it made me nauseous. But I didn't read more than the previews. Didn't open a single one because I was done giving her space in my life. Done absorbing her chaos like it was my responsibility. Done being the emotional trash can she dumped her pain into. The next morning, the legal fallout hit hard and fast. Chris's lawyer notified us that Claire had officially been served with the next court date. The restraining order hearing was scheduled, and our parents, who had spent years brushing off her behavior as overly emotional or a difficult phase, finally confronted her after the police delivered formal notices. And according to my mother, Claire didn't take it well, screaming that our entire family was conspiring to take her life away, smashing a plate, locking herself in her room, and sobbing for hours loud enough that the neighbors considered calling someone to check on her, and hearing that should have broken me, should have ignited that lifelong instinct to soothe her, explain for her, fix her messes. But all I felt was this aching, exhausted sadness. Not guilt, not fear, just sadness. Because no matter how deeply I dove into therapy, no matter how much I healed, no matter how many boundaries I placed, Claire remained exactly where she always had been, trapped in a fantasy she built with her own hands, refusing to accept that her choices had consequences. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly transforming in ways I hadn't realized until I stepped back and looked at it. My mornings were peaceful, my hands didn't shake every time my phone buzzed, I could sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times. And when Ethan held me, I didn't brace for betrayal the way I used to, because his love wasn't obsessive or controlling or performative like Claire's attachment to him had been. It was calm, grounding, intentional, the kind of love that didn't demand anything except honesty and presence. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was allowed to exist without performing, without defending myself, without constantly proving I wasn't the villain Claire made me out to be. And as the lawsuit edged forward, digital evidence stacking, witness depositions taken, Claire's incriminating search history documented, Ethan and I spent our evenings planning small pieces of the future we were slowly building. Maybe adopting another dog so Max wouldn't be lonely. Maybe moving to a quieter neighborhood once everything settled. Maybe taking a trip somewhere warm when the court dates ended. And every time Claire tried to insert herself again, sending another hateful email, creating a new fake account to stalk us, trying to accidentally bump into Ethan outside his gym, she was met not with fear or emotional turmoil, but with firm boundaries, legal consequences, and a version of me she no longer knew how to manipulate. The final breaking point came 2 weeks after our anniversary, when she showed up in our parents' driveway, screaming that I had stolen her soulmate. And my father, who had always been gentle with her, finally snapped and said, "Ethan was never yours, Claire. You can't lose something you never had." And hearing that, retold to me later, made something inside me settle with a painful clarity, because that was the truth Claire spent 11 years refusing to face. Love isn't something you're owed, it's something freely given. And Ethan had never given her anything except polite discomfort. And when the restraining order was officially granted, when the court informed her that she was legally barred from contacting any of us, when she realized the world wasn't bending to her fantasy anymore, she collapsed in the hallway of the courthouse while I stood outside holding Ethan's hand, feeling equal parts grief and freedom because I did care about her once, deeply, fiercely, but caring didn't mean sacrificing myself at the altar of her delusions. And I finally understood that loving someone who refuses to see reality doesn't save them. It only destroys you. As Ethan drove us home that afternoon with the windows cracked and Max's head resting on my shoulder, I stared out at the sun breaking through the clouds and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you realize the worst has already happened and you survived it. The kind that lets you breathe without guilt. The kind that tells you it's okay to leave someone behind even if you share DNA. And that evening, when Ethan and I sat in his backyard again, candles flickering, his fingers laced through mine, he kissed my temple and whispered, "You deserve a life that isn't built around someone else's pain." And in that moment, I finally accepted it. Not as a comforting thought, but as a truth I was ready to live by because Claire's pain was real, and her loneliness was real, and her obsession came from something broken inside her long before Ethan or I entered the picture. But acknowledging her suffering didn't mean carrying it anymore. So when I finally let out a long breath, leaned into Ethan's chest, and whispered back, "I'm choosing my future now," it wasn't a victory over her, it was a release, a quiet surrender of a burden that was never mine to hold. And as the night settled around us, warm and still, I realized that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just feels like finally walking away from a fire you spent your whole life trying to put out. The end. I made my sister-in-law feel terrible about her weight. Now my wife wants to talk, but I'm not the one at fault. I never thought a piece of wood could hold my entire heart until the day my son Kai and I built that chair together in our tiny backyard in Ohio. The summer when life still felt warm and possible. The summer before everything inside of me shattered. And maybe that's why even now, at 36, every breath feels like a negotiation with grief I never agreed to. Because when people talk about moving on, they don't understand that grief doesn't ask where you're going. It sits on your chest whenever it wants. It follows you into every room and presses its face against your memories. And that damn chair was the only thing that ever made my chest loosen again. The only thing that felt like my boy's laughter hadn't been erased from the world. The only thing that reminded me Kai was real, that his small hands really did hold mine, that he really did lean against me with sawdust in his hair while we sanded that chair until the wood looked as soft as his smile. So when I tell you the chair mattered, I don't mean like furniture matters, I mean like air matters, like breathing matters, like something alive inside me needed that chair to survive. And maybe that's why the universe had to test me with Carrie, my sister-in-law. 29, loud in a way that shakes walls, careless in a way that never includes consequences. A woman who has never held something fragile without immediately setting it down like it burnt her. And I swear she has been sitting in that chair since the week Kai died. Long before she even asked if she could. Long before she ever wondered if she should. And every single time she came over, she'd drop into it like she was falling out of the sky. Giggling, messing with her hair, scrolling through her phone loudly, and every time I'd say, gently, carefully, "Hey Carrie, could you sit on the couch instead? That chair is special." And every time she'd laugh like I was telling her a quirky fact, like I was being dramatic, like the chair wasn't the last thing my son and I ever built together. And then Maya, my wife, the person who should have had my back, the person who held me the night we buried Kai, would glance at me and shrug like I was making a weird fuss, whispering, "It's just a chair, Liam." But it was never just a chair, and the fact that Maya refused to see it made something inside me rot slowly, quietly, the way mold creeps across wood when nobody notices. Still, I kept swallowing it, kept telling myself Maya was stressed or tired or just trying to avoid tension with her sister, and I kept letting Carrie sit in it, even though it felt like someone was ripping pieces of my heart out and leaving them on the floor. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the day everything finally cracked, literally and emotionally, because it was one of those heavy Saturday afternoons when the air smells like takeout and laziness, and Carrie showed up with 2 giant bags of fast food, laughing loudly about some TikTok she saw, her breath smelling like garlic fries as she hugged Maya, who hugged her back like she was the second coming of Jesus. And I watched them, wondering how 2 sisters could be so physically affectionate while emotionally tone-deaf to everyone else around them. Carrie waddled into the living room, unwrapping her burger like it was a Christmas gift, grease already dripping onto the floor, and before I could even form the words, because I swear I tried to form them, I opened my mouth, she plopped down onto Kai's chair with a force that made the whole house vibrate, and then it happened. A loud, deep, violent crack. The kind that echoes, the kind that tells you something important, something irreplaceable, has just been broken forever. And I froze because my brain couldn't process it. Because for a moment, I swore I heard Kai laughing in the memory of sawdust and summer sun. And then I came crashing back into the present where Carrie's weight had splintered the last physical piece of him I had left. She blinked, stared at the broken leg beneath her, and then, God help me, she laughed, a weird, high-pitched, nervous giggle, the kind people make when they're embarrassed but trying to pretend they're not, and she said, "Oops, guess your DIY project wasn't as strong as you thought." Like she hadn't just destroyed the last thing I built with my dead child. And Maya jumped up, clutching Carrie's arm, saying, "It's fine, Carrie. Don't worry about it. It was old anyway." And that was it. That was the breaking point I didn't even know I was walking toward. Because when Maya said old, something inside me detonated. Slow, but unstoppable. Like a fuse that had been burning for months, and before I could stop myself, before I could breathe, before I could remember how to be polite, I heard myself say, "You don't get to laugh about breaking the last thing I built with my son." And the room went silent except for Carrie's uneven breathing, her face turning red, not from guilt, but humiliation. And for a moment, I thought she might apologize. I thought she might understand, but instead she burst into tears and screamed, "So what? You're calling me fat? You're saying I'm huge? You're shaming me for my body?" And I stared at her, stunned, because that wasn't what I said. That wasn't even what I meant, and Maya turned on me, not slowly, not hesitantly, but immediately, ferociously snapping, "Liam, you didn't have to say it like that. She didn't mean to break it." And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe my wife was defending the woman who broke our son's chair instead of defending the memory of the boy we lost. And I tried to explain. I tried to breathe. I tried to say, "It's not about her weight. It's about Kai." But my voice felt too small, too thin, too drowned out by Carrie's dramatic sobbing and Maya's angry, comforting noises. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. The fracture in the chair wasn't the only fracture happening. Something in my marriage had cracked too, and this time, no amount of sanding or glue could fix it. I wish I could say the house felt normal after the chair incident, but the truth is, the air inside our home changed so fast, it felt like someone had reached into my lungs and rearranged the oxygen. Because from the very next morning, Maya walked around with this sharp, silent tension that clung to her skin like humidity. And I knew she wanted to say something, maybe scream something, but instead she said, "We need to talk," in that clipped, careful voice people use when they've already made up their mind about you, but want you to incriminate yourself first. And I told her, "Okay, talk." But she didn't. She said she was tired, said she needed time, said she didn't want to fight, said today wasn't good, said tonight wasn't either, and little by little, the talk became this ghost. She kept waving in my face without ever letting it materialize. By the third night, she moved into the guest room without warning, carrying her pillow under her arm like I was contagious, and I stood there in the hallway watching her close the door behind her, while I wondered how the hell I became the villain in a story that started with me losing my son's last memory. But the thing that really broke me wasn't even the silence inside the house. It was the noise outside it, because apparently while Maya was giving me cold shoulders and half-formed sentences, Carrie was busy running a whole PR campaign against me, telling anyone whose number she had that I called her disgusting, huge, a whale, and a dozen other things I never said, never even thought. And suddenly I was opening the family group chat, a chat I used to ignore because it was always filled with recipe swaps and chain messages, only to find 50 unread messages all dragging me like I was some monster, calling me cruel, heartless, emotionally unstable, saying things like, "How could you talk to Carrie like that when she has body image issues?" And "You need therapy, Liam," and "Grief doesn't give you the right to insult people." And I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking, scrolling through text after text, realizing they were defending Carrie like she was a national treasure, while dismissing the fact that she broke something I built with Kai. Something they never even acknowledged existed, because most of them didn't even bother showing up for his memorial. And the betrayal stung so deep, it felt like someone had sunk their fingers into a wound I'd stitched shut with my own hands. Because all I ever did was ask them to respect one thing, one single object that tied me to the child I lost. But apparently, that was too much to ask. And while all this was happening outside, inside the house, Maya kept treating me like a roommate who occasionally pissed her off, barely making eye contact, walking around me like I was a chair she kept bumping into, and every time I tried to speak, she'd say, "Not now, later, I'm not ready," or "I don't want to fight again," even though we hadn't fought at all. What happened wasn't a fight. It was me standing up for something sacred. Meanwhile, I'd catch glimpses of her texting late at night in the guest room with the door cracked open, her face lit by the glow of her phone like some kind of vigil. And I didn't need to see the screen to know she was talking to Carrie, because every time she typed, her jaw clenched in that specific way she reserved for when she wanted to protect her sister at any cost. And somewhere in that silent, aching month, I started having these flashbacks, not of the chair or the moment it cracked, but of parenting Kai, of how simple things used to be, of how gentle love used to feel. The bedtime stories, the mornings where he climbed into my lap, the afternoons we spent fixing tiny things around the house because he loved feeling useful. And I contrasted that with Maya's family dynamic, where everything was drama, everything was emotional volatility. Everything was loud, messy, boundaryless, and I had just accepted it for years because I loved her. But now I couldn't stop seeing it for what it was, a family that didn't understand grief, didn't respect memories, didn't know how to honor something without turning it into a performance or a pity party. And just when I thought Maya might actually talk to me, one night she cornered me in the kitchen and said, "You need to apologize to Carrie," with the same tone someone uses to tell a child to say sorry for bumping into a stranger. And I blinked at her, feeling like my brain was buffering, because how could she think that was a solution? How could she not see the insanity in asking me to apologize for caring about a chair tied to my dead son? And I told her, I'm not apologizing for being hurt, but she pressed harder this time. "You hurt her feelings, Liam," and something inside me finally snapped, quietly, cleanly, like glass under pressure. And I told her, I won't apologize for loving my son. And Maya looked at me like I'd just confessed to something unforgivable, like loving Kai made me unreasonable. And then she said the sentence that still sticks to the inside of my skull like mold. "We'll talk in a month. I need space." And she walked away, leaving me standing there with my hands shaking over the sink, realizing that my wife, the woman who buried a child with me, was choosing her sister's temporary embarrassment over my permanent grief. And that was the moment something inside me shifted forever, because for the first time since Kai died, I felt truly, painfully alone. I didn't know a month could feel like a slow, grinding funeral for a marriage until the 30 days after Maya told me she needed space. Because every morning I woke up in a house that felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for a decision she'd already made. And every night I went to sleep in a bed that still smelled like her shampoo, even though she hadn't slept in it for weeks. And that combination, her absence and her lingering scent, made the air feel dense, like I was breathing through wet cloth. And the worst part wasn't even the silence. It was the small, ugly interactions that filled the space between that silence. Like Carrie sending me passive-aggressive texts every other day. Little gems like, "Hope you're working on yourself," or "Therapy helps people like you, Liam," Sal, or my favorite, "You owe me an apology before the family vacation," which made me laugh out loud, because what kind of reality did she live in where I was the one who owed her something? And the more she texted, the more I realized she actually believed her own made-up version of the incident. The one where I apparently screamed at her and called her slurs when the truth was I barely raised my voice. Meanwhile, Maya kept floating around the house like a ghost, with a schedule: waking up earlier than usual, leaving for work without saying more than "keys," or "did you eat?" and returning late, claiming she was too tired to talk. And the little slivers of interaction we did have weren't conversations. They were transactions. Like we were coworkers passing each other in a hallway. Intimacy wasn't even a concept anymore. Not emotional, not physical, not spiritual, nothing. She wouldn't even sit next to me on the couch, acting like proximity might infect her with accountability. But the moment that truly made me question my grip on reality was when Maya's mother, a woman who had always been a hurricane, disguised as a human, called me one afternoon and asked if I planned to replace the chair I broke for Carrie. And for a good 4 seconds, I genuinely couldn't tell if she was joking or having some sort of stroke. Because not only did Carrie break my chair, but somehow the family had collectively rewritten the event into a martyrdom where Carrie was the victim and I was the villain. And when I calmly said it was my son's chair, Maya's mother replied with, "Well, you should have put it somewhere safe if it was that fragile." And that sentence hit me like someone pouring bleach on an open wound. So instead of staying in the suffocating living room, where every piece of furniture felt like a witness to my marriage dissolving, I started spending more time in Kai's old room, a small, sunlit corner of the house that still smelled faintly like lemon-scented wood polish and childhood. And I'd sit on the floor with my back against the wall, tracing the dents he made on the baseboards with his toy cars, remembering how he'd line them up on the windowsill and ask me which one looked fastest. And those memories, instead of breaking me the way they used to, started giving me something Maya hadn't given me in a long time: clarity. Because the more time I spent in that room, the more I realized I had spent years excusing Maya's emotional abandonment. Not just now, but long before the chair incident. All the birthdays she brushed off because she was exhausted. All the times I cried quietly in the bathroom after Kai died and she never once came in to check on me. All the morning she'd say, "You're still not over it?" As if grief were a cold I was supposed to shake off. Grief doesn't disappear, it grows new layers, and each time she dismissed it, something inside me closed a little more. But I didn't see it clearly until this month, when the house finally got quiet enough for me to hear my own thoughts. And then, after almost 4 weeks of avoidance, Maya finally approached me, standing in the doorway of Kai's room with her arms crossed, like she didn't want to step all the way inside, like the room itself was an emotional crime scene, and she said, "We need to talk now." But her voice wasn't soft, wasn't curious, wasn't loving, it was managerial, like she was about to conduct an HR meeting. And when I nodded and followed her into the living room, she didn't sit next to me, she sat across from me, and the distance between us felt so wide I swear I could feel a breeze. Then she said the words I already knew were coming. "I've thought a lot, and I think the best way forward is for you to apologize to Carrie." And it was wild, absolutely surreal, how she said it with complete seriousness, like this was a reasonable, mutually beneficial solution, and I stared at her. Really stared, seeing her not as my wife, but as a woman who had never once tried to understand me. A woman who was more concerned with protecting her sister's ego than protecting her husband's heart. And something inside me finally locked into place. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. Pure clarity. The kind that makes decisions feel less like choices and more like conclusions. And as she kept talking, explaining how Carrie is really hurt, and the family is upset, and an apology would fix so much, I realized she didn't understand grief, didn't understand boundaries, didn't understand loyalty, didn't understand partnership, didn't understand respect, not because she was incapable, but because she never cared to learn, never cared to try, never cared to step into someone else's emotional world if it didn't benefit her. So when she finally paused and said, "Well, will you apologize so we can move on?" The answer formed itself in my chest before it even reached my mouth, because for the first time in years, I saw my marriage for what it was. A place where my grief was an inconvenience, where my son's memory was a burden, where my pain was negotiable, but her sister's feelings were sacred, and in that clarity, I realized exactly what I needed to do. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning, so quiet it almost felt like the world was holding its breath. And maybe that's why it didn't feel dramatic or explosive the way people imagine divorce to be. It felt like walking out of a burning house after finally admitting the flames weren't going to magically turn into warmth. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the smallest flicker of control inside me. Maya didn't. The second the papers hit the kitchen table that evening, she exploded with this wild, confused anger that came out in waves, shouting that I was overreacting, that I was making something small into the end of everything, that I was being emotional and irrational. Emotional? Maybe. Irrational? No. I stood there, listening to her rant while I looked at her face, the woman I once thought I'd grow old with, and all I saw was someone who had stopped seeing me a long time ago. When she finally paused long enough to inhale, I said the one sentence she had pushed me into saying, "You didn't just disrespect the chair, you disrespected Kai." And watching her expression twist into confusion, then annoyance, then defensiveness, that was the moment I realized she genuinely didn't get it. She didn't understand that the chair wasn't a piece of furniture, it was a piece of my son. It held the fingerprints he left when he'd climb onto it with his tiny hands. It held the scratch from the time he banged his toy truck into it. It held all the breakfast where he sat swinging his legs while I tied his shoes. And instead of understanding why that mattered, Maya looked at me like I was crazy for caring. Before she could respond, Carrie appeared. Because of course she did, acting like she was walking into the climax of a movie starring her as a suffering, misunderstood heroine. She immediately launched into her dramatic monologue about how she never meant it to cause trouble, how she didn't know the chair meant so much, how she felt attacked when I told her not to sit there. I swear she could have won an award for the performance. She dabbed her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater and leaned on Maya like she was on the verge of fainting, and then she played her favorite card. I was only trying to be a part of this family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't argue. I simply took out my phone, opened the folder I prepared, and put every screenshot, every message, every timestamped text from her right in front of them. The texts where she mocked me, the ones where she called me dramatic, where she told Maya she should stop enabling the shrine, where she joked to her cousin that she'd break the stupid chair if she felt like it. Maya read them slowly, her face draining of color, but even then, even as she saw the evidence with her own eyes, she still tried to negotiate the situation like she was mediating a fight between two kids. "Okay, but maybe she didn't mean most of that," she said softly, brushing Carrie's shoulder like her sister was made of glass and I was made of steel. And that was when I realized something devastating and freeing at the same time. Maya would always choose keeping the peace with her family over protecting the memory of my son. My grief made her uncomfortable, and instead of standing beside me, she had been slowly walking away for years. When I told her calmly, "I'm moving out tonight," she broke. She wasn't crying because she understood my pain. She was crying because she realized I was actually leaving. There's a difference between someone begging you to stay because they love you and someone begging because they don't want their life to change. And Maya's tears were absolutely the second kind. She collapsed onto a chair while Carrie held her like I was the one who had betrayed her. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just packed what was mine, walked into Kai's room one last time, and let the stillness wrap around me. His room always felt different, lighter, safer, as if the air remembered him. I picked up the broken pieces of the sacred chair I had hidden away after the incident. It felt like I was holding bones. I placed them gently in a box, took a deep breath, and walked out of the house that had stopped being home long before the papers were signed. The first night alone in my new place was quiet. Too quiet at first, but then something settled inside me. Something like peace. The next morning, I unpacked the box with the chair pieces. I spread them out on the floor, observing every crack, every dent, every scrape. I remembered Kai's laughter, the way he'd giggle so hard his whole body would shake, the way he'd climb up on that chair and try to help me cook by handing me completely unnecessary objects like a spoon when I needed flour or a toy car when I needed a bowl. My hands shook for a moment, then steadied as I picked up the sandpaper. I wasn't just fixing wood. I wasn't repairing a chair. I was reclaiming something that had been disrespected, misunderstood, and pushed aside just because the world decided it was time for me to move on. Moving on isn't forgetting. Moving on isn't replacing. Moving on isn't erasing. Moving on is choosing which pieces you carry forward. I spent hours sanding, shaping, smoothing the splintered wood, feeling every line under my fingertips like they were the ridges of memory. I remembered the weight of Kai's small hand in mine. Remembered the way he'd point at birds outside the window and say, "Look, Mama, they're talking." That's why I carved the wood into the shape of a small bird perched on a branch, soft, delicate, full of gentle life, a symbol of him, a symbol of freedom, a symbol of something that no one could disrespect again. When I finished, the sculpture glowed softly under the light, warm and alive in a way that made my chest ache. I placed it on the top shelf of my new living room, high enough that no one would ever sit on it, touch it, or mock it again. And standing there, looking at it, the final truth settled like a quiet sunrise. My marriage didn't end because of a chair. It ended because I stayed loyal to the memory of my son, long after Maya stopped being loyal to me. The bird sat silently, but somehow it felt like it was speaking for both of us, me and the little boy whose laughter I would never hear again, but whose love would never fade. And that's when I spoke the final line out loud. Not for Maya, not for Carrie, not for anyone else, just for myself and for him. My marriage ended, but the memory of my son finally has a place where no one can ever sit on it again. The end.